Chapter 241, Ryan's Attention. Besides the 7 unbreakable combinations, what other intriguing pairings do you have here? Tom Riddle asked, idly stroking the length of his wand. He could feel Professor Dumbledore's steady gaze on him, so he smoothly shifted the topic. These, sir, are our most exceptional wand cores, Mr. Ollivander replied, stepping forward from behind the display. Each pairing is meticulously balanced, quite different from the 7 unbreakables, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Riddle's curiosity was piqued. And which cores stand out the most? Ollivander's pale eyes gleamed with pride. First, the heartstrings of the Trobroris, a creature so rare it borders on legend. Then there's pure dragon bone marrow, followed by genuine giant heartstrings. But the rarest of all. He paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the air. Unicorn heartstrings. Unicorn heartstrings? Riddle echoed, his voice low with fascination. He'd wielded a wand containing unicorn tail hair for years, yet he had never encountered one made from a unicorn's heartstring. The first 3 materials were extraordinarily scarce. The last was practically unheard of. As Ollivander prepared to explain the unique properties of each core, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. The grand display of wands, each more remarkable than the last, seemed to hum with magic, drawing every onlooker's full attention. And for Tom Riddle, the promise of hidden power in those exotic cores was impossible to ignore. The unicorn's blood, and any of its tissues, become deeply cursed unless they're offered of their own free will, Dumbledore said quietly. I suppose it makes sense that a unicorn might willingly give its blood, his colleague replied, but willingly part with its flesh, or even its own heart. Unless someone has crafted a spell that forces unicorns to consent, Dumbledore mused, his brow furrowing. Unicorns possess a purity of magic that naturally repels the dark arts. Their tail-hair wands are famed for their unwavering loyalty. While a wizard could physically harm a unicorn, twisting its mind is another matter entirely, even for someone of my skill, Dumbledore admitted to himself. That, he reflected, is the true wonder of magical creatures. Each species carries unique strengths that often outstrip wizardry in certain respects. Wizards may wield the imperious curse to dominate a creature's will, but even a newborn unicorn cannot be magically compelled to offer its blood. If a curse forcing unicorn compliance did exist, unicorn farms would be as common as dragon stables, and the magical world's balance of power would shift overnight. At the prospect of such upheaval, Dumbledore's expression turned grave. It felt as though time had stopped in Ollivander's shop. Tom Riddle held the slender unicorn hair wand in his palm. It gave a faint, shuddering tremor that set both Ollivander and Professor Dumbledore on edge. A miracle, Riddle murmured, eyes alight. But not the kind you're imagining. May I? Ollivander broke the silence, stepping forward. Would you like to test the unicorn hair core? By all means. Riddle raised the wand, peering at it with a half-smile. Then, almost on cue, the wand stilled. Ollivander and Dumbledore exchanged astonished glances. It had come to rest as though obeying Riddle's silent command. That wand already has an owner, Ollivander cautioned, voice low. I'm not at liberty to reveal who, Riddle replied smoothly, his fingers tightening around the polished wood. But you witnessed its reaction. It chose me. A pity, Ollivander said with genuine regret. But you must understand, owners do matter. Is that so surprising? Riddle tilted his head at Dumbledore, amusement dancing in his eyes. This wand suits me perfectly. Nothing short of the extraordinary could match my needs. He slipped the wand into his robes. Shall we be on our way then? Hogwarts awaits. Ollivander cleared his throat. The price, Mr. Riddle. Riddle paused at the door, turning back to face the wand maker. His curiosity had already soured into annoyance. 7 gold galleons, came the casual reply. Riddle merely nodded, producing a small pouch of coins. As Ollivander tallied the payment, Dumbledore offered Riddle a discreet smile. No one could deny that. Whatever dark destiny lay ahead, Tom Riddle had found exactly what he was looking for. I couldn't shake the thought that there must be a way to keep one of their wands, Riddle's, or even Dumbledore's, but they both refused without a moment's hesitation, paid the bill, and slipped out of Ollivander's shop under his disappointed gaze. Before long, they were on their way back to Hogwarts. Truth be told, I scarcely noticed the rest of our time in Diagon Alley. My wizarding intuition never so much as flickered. These errands felt like candy, a sweet diversion, but hardly essential. Instead, I used the opportunity to deploy another anchor in Tom Riddle's diary, exactly at the moment young Voldemort broke through to what I call Level 6, mirroring Harry's own breakthrough. It wasn't because I expected to learn anything new about love from Voldemort. Harry's story had already taught me everything on that front. Rather, I've made it my habit to plant these anchors for every character I'm tracking, all except Dumbledore, whose narrative I clipped at that very same level. These anchors serve a dual purpose. They freeze the scene and record everything that came before. Whenever I choose, I can replay the entire sequence like a video, catching up on any developments I might have missed. That way, I can focus on my own projects without worrying about the latest twists in the wizarding world slipping through my fingers. Ryan couldn't tear his eyes away from the most extraordinary scene he'd witnessed all day. In his previous life as Zhou Yi, among all the heart-wrenching moments in the 7 Harry Potter books, it was Dobby's death that had brought him to tears, more than Dumbledore's passing ever had. He still remembered Dobby's anguished cry. Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf, and Dobby is here to rescue Harry Potter and his friends. But in this altered timeline, everything had changed. Draco Malfoy had switched sides, joining Harry's circle in Hermione's stead. His father, Lucius, now stood with Dumbledore. The diary that once possessed Ginny Weasley had become a sentient being in its own right, and next year the basilisk would likely vanish from the castle altogether. Since Lucius never sneaked the diary into Hogwarts, there had been no meddling elf to rescue Harry, no attempts to prevent him from attending school or force him to drop out, and no fateful moment when Harry freed Dobby with a pair of socks. None of that mattered now, because today, on the sprawling Malfoy estate in Wiltshire, a new and undeniably intriguing scene was unfolding. Just outside Malfoy Manor, the once Malfoy family lands have been swallowed by towering modern buildings, everywhere except the drive leading to the old house. Here, the world feels suspended in time. A thick wall of perfectly clipped yew hedges surrounds the estate, their dark green boughs so dense they look like stone. A wide gravel driveway stretches between 2 ornate wrought iron gates, the only way in or out. Perched atop the hedges, white peacocks preen in the soft afternoon light. Beyond them lies a vast garden, crisscrossed with winding paths and dotted with sculpted fountains that send up fine plumes of mist. Sunlight catches droplets in midair and casts rainbow sparkles over flower beds, creating an almost enchanted hush. Then, with a startling crack, that peace shatters. A man steps through the gates, tall, dark-cloaked, purpose written in every stride. The peacocks squawk and beat their wings in panic. At his feet, a hollow silver chalice embossed with black, arcane runes tumbles from his grip and clangs against the gravel. Ryan watches it all with a faint, critical smile. He steps forward, lifts the chalice, and turns it in his hand, the runes glinting ominously. Too gaudy, he murmurs. The N tucks the artifact under his cloak as he follows the newcomer up the drive toward the manor's grand doors. In the Malfoy household, where one would expect a door key to be an unremarkable trinket, it had instead been replaced by an ostentatious piece of silverware. Chapter 242, Old Malfoy Confesses. Ryan's first impression of Malfoy Manor was its sheer size. From the iron gates to the front hall, it took a full 10 minutes of brisk walking. As he followed Lucius Malfoy, Ryan noticed there was no flue connection on the fireplace, an omission almost unheard of in a wizard's home, and that the large brass key they carried didn't even open the main door of the estate. Lucius himself looked as though he might collapse at any moment. His face was deathly pale. His hands trembled so violently that he abandoned his silver cutlery on the gravel path as if it were no more than discarded junk. Straight ahead, a wide carriage drive led to the mansion proper. Although grand carriages no longer rumbled here, the flank of trimmed hedges and cobbled lane still spoke of past opulence. When the house came into full view, its grandeur was undeniable. Ground-floor windows gleamed with diamond-pane glass, each sash edged with intricate carved stone. The walls rose in proud symmetry, every cornice and pilaster a testament to old-world artistry. In every sense, this was more than a family home. It was a living masterpiece, one the Malfoys had carefully preserved and enhanced through the generations. Ryan couldn't help but notice how the Malfoys kept adding ever more elaborate flourishes to the mansion's interior. Marble columns sprouting where plain walls had been, gilded moldings tracing every archway. That's so Malfoy, he thought wryly, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or a rebuke. Ahead of him strode the elder Lucius Malfoy, his silver serpent-headed cane clicking deliberately on the polished stone. As they passed along the corridor, Ryan watched small pieces of fallen silverware vanish back into the floorboards, no doubt spirited away by invisible house elf magic. If there was one thing the Malfoys never did, it seemed, it was stoop to pick up what they dropped. Ryan fell into step, matching Lucius's slow, measured pace. 10 minutes later, they entered a vast hallway so deep inside the estate that almost no daylight penetrated. The only illumination came from dozens of scented candles set in tall, wrought-iron holders, their gentle glow dancing across walls of pale marble. It felt oddly oppressive. Most noble houses prized bright, spacious rooms, but here the opulence lay in shadow. No wonder the Slytherin common room sat below ground, Ryan mused. The family's taste for hushed grandeur and muted light suited their reputation perfectly. A plush, emerald-toned carpet stretched from wall to wall, muting each step as though even footsteps must bow to Malfoy refinement. Ryan pressed on, curiosity, and a growing sense of foreboding, already prickling at the back of his neck. Lucius Malfoy advanced down the marble corridor, his own pale profile mirrored by the portraits that lined the walls. Each painting, as chalky and severe as any typical Malfoy, turned its painted eyes toward him in silent concern. Beyond these frames lay an almost absurd number of heavy wooden doors, so many that Ryan, watching from a discreet distance, couldn't help but grin. If Malfoys trusted house elves with every household chore, yet never grew portly, perhaps it was this mansion's endless corridors doing them the favor of a built-in workout. Ryan even wondered whether Dobby's fervent longing for freedom sprang more from exhaustion than any high-minded ideal. 10 minutes later, Lucius emerged into the grand drawing room and nearly collided with his wife Narcissa, who was slipping into her cloak. "Lucius, what's wrong?" she said, touching his arm with genuine alarm. He forced a nonchalant smile. "Oh, nothing, sissy," he replied smoothly, meeting her gaze only briefly. He had no intention of confessing what he'd discovered in Diagon Alley, or admitting that he had quietly surrendered to Dumbledore's demands. Narcissa's brow furrowed with suspicion. "Really? Nothing at all?" Narcissa's eyes snapped open the moment Lucius closed the study door behind him. "What happened in Diagon Alley today?" He paused, removing his gloves. She rose from the settee by the hearth, seized his right arm, and guided him into a low chair beside her. "Tell me," she demanded softly. "What did Arthur Weasley do this time? You handled that mess at home last week, so what's brought him back to our doorstep?" Lucius sank into the cushions. Narcissa leaned forward, voice gentle but insistent. "He's been poking around our business, saying it's illegal. He sent Aurors to inspect the grounds. I'd wager everything that incident with Draco wasn't an accident. The Weasleys had a hand in it." Lucius said nothing. Narcissa pressed on, gathering speed. "You're out so often lately. What does Draco do all day but praise Ron's father? Your dad's marvelous, Draco. He's the greatest wizard at the Ministry. Meanwhile, Arthur's cozying up to my cousin, and you two vanish together at odd hours. I wonder what you three get up to." She drew a breath as her accusations grew bolder. "Come now, Lucius. You weren't having an affair with that. Well, you know who." A muscle twitched in Lucius's jaw. At last, he cut through her tirade. "Sissy." His voice shook, startling her into silence. He took her hand and held it firmly. "I'm going to tell you everything. You mustn't be afraid." Narcissa's heart pounded. She leaned closer, ready to hear the truth at last. Narcissa paced the marble floor of the Malfoy drawing room, her pale fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. "Lucius, you don't understand," she said at last, voice trembling with fear. "I'm terrified for Draco. Next year at Hogwarts, surrounded by Dumbledore's protégés, mixing with Potter and the Weasleys, I can't bear the thought." Lucius looked up from his armchair, his silvery hair catching the afternoon light. He steepled his hands and offered her a calm smile. "Sissy," he began, using his favorite pet name for her, "it might actually be a good thing." "A good thing?" Narcissa scoffed. then paused as a new thought struck her. She narrowed her eyes, chin lifted. Hogwarts is Dumbledore's stronghold. If the Dark Lord can stroll its corridors, perhaps even teach there, then he must be harmless. Lucius's smile deepened. On the contrary, my dear, he said softly. By inviting Voldemort, no matter what title he assumes, into Hogwarts, Dumbledore only cements his own control. He shows the world he's not afraid. And with Draco now friendly with Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, we're squarely on the side that will win. Narcissa hesitated. Just weeks ago, you were in league with Arthur Weasley and Sirius Black, she reminded him. His gaze grew distant. Not entirely. Not now. We've shifted alliances. Dumbledore's cause offers us greater security. She studied him, unsettled by the change in his tone. Then Lucius leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. The true instrument of Voldemort's downfall, he said, is that diary. Narcissa froze. The diary? She repeated in astonishment. Ever the schemer, Lucius had plans within plans, but the notion that a mere book could bring down the Dark Lord seemed absurd. I thought it was just a dark artifact, Tom Riddle's plaything. He nodded gravely. Precisely. It holds a fragment of his soul. Destroy it, and you cripple him beyond recovery. Narcissa closed her eyes a moment, willing herself to believe him. When she opened them again, her composure had returned. Very well, she said, brushing an errant curl from her face. But tonight, let's not dwell on secret Horcruxes. Draco mentioned he'll be staying with Sirius and Ron once term begins. Tomorrow, we'll go shopping, for gifts for my cousin, and for Draco's 2 new friends. Lucius rose and offered her his arm. As they walked toward the window, sunlight danced across the silver snakes embroidered on her gown, the silent promise of an alliance forged in both fear and cunning. And somewhere in the dark corridors of Malfoy Manor, the fate of a Dark Lord trembled on the edge of a single enchanted page. Narcissa admitted to herself that her occlumency wasn't yet strong enough to shield all her thoughts, and, for that matter, she didn't need to pry into every detail of this news. There's one more thing, Lucius Malfoy said, breaking the heavy silence. She lifted her brow. What is it? He gave a weary sigh. I need to find an appropriate gift before I return to Hogwarts. Chapter 243. Dobby is a Free Elf. Deep in Nottingham Forest, Ryan wandered happily among the trees, a satisfied grin on his face. As a perennial bystander, what the internet calls a melon eater, he lived for gossip, and today's developments had more than filled his tank. At Malfoy Manor, Lucius Malfoy had recovered remarkably fast from his initial shock. He frowned, tracing the appearance of this mysteriously youthful Tom Riddle back to the Horcrux he'd once dispatched. His sharp mind leapt to recent conversations he'd had with Dumbledore about the unexpected candidate for defense against the dark arts. Of course, what better surprise than the Dark Lord's own lost past, returned from obscurity? Smoothing his robes, Lucius resolved to get to Hogwarts as soon as possible. He'd bring the customary house gifts, he told himself, but his real mission was to learn exactly how and why Tom Riddle had come back. Narcissa Malfoy, by contrast, was still reeling. News of a living Tom Riddle and her family's precarious position left her flustered. All she could think to do was refine her cousin's wording, insist on remembering Ron Weasley by name, and prepare small tokens for both him and Harry Potter, hoping to secure goodwill. But before she could finish, Dobby, the family's house elf, caught up in their whispered plotting, vanished in a blink. The thin sound of his quiet freedom was the only answer she got. And so Dobby slipped away, leaving Malfoy Manor behind and setting out on a new life as a free elf. Dobby had no idea that his master's family had quietly aligned itself with the one wizard he admired, second only to Albus Dumbledore. All he wanted was to keep Harry Potter from ever returning to Hogwarts. Now that he was a free elf, he couldn't pinpoint exactly when the thought first stirred in his mind. Was it the memory of his parents, who died to satisfy the horrific experiments of he who must not be named? Or was it the chilling indifference of his fellow house elves, who, rather than mourn their lost kin, hailed their master's cruel triumph as glorious? Perhaps it began on the night of October 31st, 1981, when the Dark Lord's power shattered and a mysterious figure vanished, leaving Harry Potter alive in his place. From that moment on, the dark magic was broken, and Dobby could never forget the name Harry Potter. Before that fateful night, house elves had been treated like pests. Even after Harry defeated the greatest evil of all, little changed in the way wizards viewed them. Yet Dobby held on to a single stubborn hope, that this free elf might still find a way to protect the boy who changed everything. Harry Potter was a shining beacon to anyone who feared the Dark Lord's reign would last forever. For Dobby, that light sparked a dangerous longing, the desire for freedom. In his desperation, he began to punish himself. He pressed his palms against red-hot irons, trapped his ears in the oven door, and most often, when the pain needed no instrument, banged his head relentlessly against the hard stone walls. House elves were not meant to entertain such thoughts. Yet when Dobby's masters discovered his self-inflicted wounds, they were not startled. If anything, they goaded him on, insisting he inflict more severe punishment. In turn, they grew ever more cautious, stripping Dobby of every pretense of comfort, denying him so much as a pair of socks. A decade passed in this grim routine. During those years, the household's new heir was born, a little master as spoiled and willful as any. Soon the boy's 11th birthday arrived, and with it the promise of Hogwarts. Dobby dared to hope. If this child met Harry Potter at school, perhaps rescue might finally come. Driven by that slender hope, he threw himself once more into ceaseless toil and renewed self-harm. All the while, whispers reached him of Harry's adventures at Hogwarts, outwitting stern professors, subduing a rampaging troll in the dungeons, and claiming the youngest seeker's role in Gryffindor's Quidditch team. Each tale kindled Dobby's courage and his conviction that one day, Harry Potter might set him free. Chapter 5. A Lesson from the Boy Who Lived. Draco Malfoy paused in front of the drawing-room mirror, studying the restless tension in his own reflection. He'd spiraled into a secret routine of self-harm, punishing himself for every slip and failure, until Harry Potter stepped in. Harry, the boy who lived, the boy everyone expected to be arrogant and unapproachable, had done the unthinkable. He'd befriended Draco. Even more astonishingly, when Draco's fingers itched for the familiar sting of steel against skin, Harry had laid a hand on his arm and said, quietly but firmly, "Your body belongs to the Malfoy family. If you ever try to hurt yourself again, you'll spend your time cleaning the house until every corner shines. Understood?" Draco had stared at him in shock. Mercy from Harry Potter? Compassion? He'd always regarded Harry as nothing more than a spoiled hero. But in that moment, Draco recognized the boy's true greatness. Harry wasn't just a living legend. He was kind, noble, and steadfast. He'd guided Draco toward something better, self-respect. And that wasn't all. Though Harry was only a first year, news had spread like wildfire that he'd once again defeated he who must not be named. Granted, some whispered it was merely a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul, but defeat was defeat, and Harry had done it. If the Malfoys were amazed, Dobby the house elf was positively horrified. Word had reached him that devil had returned to Hogwarts, masquerading as a professor. Dobby trembled at the thought of Harry walking into that trap. He resolved, then and there, to keep Harry away from the castle at all costs. Before dawn, Dobby slipped quietly through Privet Drive's lamplit streets and reached number 4. As an owl descended with a letter from Ron Weasley, Dobby darted forward, snatching the parchment before it could reach Harry's window. Heart-pounding, he tucked it safely away. Whatever the cost, even defying Owl Post, Dobby would protect Harry Potter from the darkness that threatened him. And so, with Harry's fate hanging in the balance, the true test of friendship began. Ryan paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. He'd always known that isolating Harry Potter from his friends would be a cruel gambit, deprive him of every letter, every owl, and the boy would be convinced he had no one left. Harry might even be tempted to abandon Hogwarts altogether. What he hadn't realized until now was that Dobby, for all his loyalty, didn't know his young master would arrive at Privet Drive on July 21st to take Harry away, even without a message from Hogwarts. That oversight delighted Ryan. It wasn't that he had doubted the existence of the protection spell surrounding Harry. He'd merely never taken the time to understand exactly how it worked. Now, dissecting its mechanics felt like opening a blind box to discover a rare treasure hidden inside. In truth, the magic guarding Harry sprang from Lily Evans's ultimate sacrifice, carried forward through the bond of blood. In the original timeline, its nature had remained mysterious, almost intuitive. It lacked self-awareness, yet possessed an uncanny ability to sense and repel malicious intent, much like the enchanted sand Gara's mother fashioned for him in another world. Importantly, it was nothing like the Fidelius charm. Instead, it was a living legacy of love and protection that no mere secret-keeping spell could replicate. Ryan leaned back and let the revelation sink in. Now that he understood the spell's true nature, he knew exactly where its blind spots lay and how he might exploit them. The enchantment surrounding Privet Drive isn't a doorway into another dimension, it's an address-based concealment. Anyone who doesn't know the exact location simply can't perceive or reach the house. Ministry of Magic officials and members of the Order of the Phoenix automatically have that knowledge. Yet any witch or wizard harboring outright ill will is barred from coming within its bounds. That's why, as a child, Harry could still meet friendly ards, and why Dobby could apparate directly to him, despite the cloak of secrecy over his home. Looking back at the original timeline, the Dementor's approach 5 years ago wasn't due to a failure in the charm, but to its own lack of malicious intent. It had been ordered merely to appear before Harry and siphon off a bit of his happiness, not to harm him physically. That directive came from Ministry insiders allied with Fudge, who hoped to provoke Harry into lashing out. If he reacted violently, they aimed to break his wand and drive him out of the magical community. If the plan failed, they would still have grounds to cast doubts on Dumbledore's judgment. With this information, the mechanism of the protective spell becomes clear. It repels only harmful intentions directed at Harry. A so-called well-meaning killing, such as Dobby's attempted intervention, wouldn't trigger the enchantment at all. From that moment on, with Dobby watching over him, Harry retreated into a life of solitude. Chapter 244, Suspicious Silence. Lately, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By now, he would have heard from Ron or Draco, at least a letter begging for homework help or recounting Slytherin mischief, but the post had been ominously quiet. Even the joint birthday card Anthony Goldstein and Neville Longbottom had promised never arrived, and most unsettling of all, there was no trace of his godfather's presence. Sirius Black was hardly the forgetful type. Ever since the first time he'd sworn never to miss another Christmas or birthday, Harry had been drowning in parcels. Every few days, another brightly wrapped box would appear on the doorstep, so regularly, in fact, that Dudley had once griped, "Harry, on my birthday, you didn't even try to use your magic to off me." It had been a teasing remark, but today Dudley looked disappointed rather than amused. Harry crossed to the corner where he kept the large, enchanted satchel Draco Malfoy's father had given him, the one concealed by an invisible expansion charm. He slid his hand inside and began pulling out Sirius's gifts, counting them carefully: a brand new Nimbus 2001 broomstick, a precision-crafted golden snitch model, the complete Doraemon manga box set, a genuine bamboo dragonfly from the Skywalker Alchemy Workshop. That was it. Only 4 items. Sirius had promised to make up for every birthday he'd ever missed, and Harry was certain there should have been more than this. He stared at the empty space in the bag and frowned. Had the owls been waylaid, stolen, or had someone, or something, deliberately intercepted Sirius's gifts before they reached him? A cold knot of worry formed in Harry's stomach. If someone was interfering with mail to his closest friends, and now with Sirius, what were they planning? And more urgently, what did that mean for the coming weeks? Harry squared his shoulders. He might not have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let anyone hurt his friends or his godfather without finding out why. With that resolve burning in his chest, he slung the bag over his shoulder and set off to confront this new mystery head-on. Harry's first full birthday with the Dursleys, discounting that brief sojourn at Grimmauld Place at the end of last month, had come and gone. Despite insisting they owed him nothing, Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon still managed to scrape together 10 meager presents. Their begrudging gifts reminded Harry just how stifling life in this purely Muggle suburb had become. Even his father's handcrafted bamboo dragonfly was banned from outdoor use, and without any way to practice magic, Harry felt as though he might go crazy from boredom. Not even his Doraemon comics could hold his attention anymore. Worse than the tedium was the loneliness. His cousin Dudley, though sharing wizarding blood, had neither interest nor imagination to bridge the gap between them. Day after day, Harry pined for Hogwarts, the ancient castle walls, the secret passages and resident ghosts, lively lessons and owl-delivered mail. He ached for the glittering feasts in the Great Hall, the canopy of his four-poster bed in Gryffindor Tower, the dilapidated cabin by the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and above all, for Hagrid's booming laugh and giant-hearted friendship. When he thought of Sirius Black and his old schoolmates, James, Lily, Remus, Harry couldn't help but wonder why not a single postcard or howler had arrived. A small, suspicious part of him guessed it was all some elaborate prank. After all, he still saw Sirius's triumphant grin after that Quidditch final, and he remembered Professor McGonagall's teasing remark about digging up the ministry files on both Sirius Black and James Potter for their record sheet of infractions. As the days stretched on with no word from the wizarding world, Harry curled up on the sofa, feeling more cut off than ever. He had survived worse summers, but this one, he feared, might be his hardest yet. When Harry finally sat down and reviewed the old House Point records, he was utterly amazed. He'd never realized just how active his father and Sirius Black had been. They must have lost points almost every single day. And it wasn't just them. Listed alongside James and Sirius were Remus Lupin and even Peter Pettigrew. Yes, that Peter Pettigrew. To top it all off, there was Professor Snape, a former Slytherin through and through. Lupin made sense. He'd been James's friend at school. But Snape? Harry could only imagine that their endless feud had cost Gryffindor dearly in house points. In fact, rumor had it that the heads of Gryffindor and Slytherin had deliberately awarded extra points here and there just to keep things from dipping into the red. If they hadn't, James's house might have ended the year with a negative score. All that back-and-forth warfare between Gryffindor and Slytherin gave Ravenclaw the perfect opening. While the two biggest houses were too busy feuding to rack up points, the Ravenclaws quietly pulled ahead and claimed the House Cup, a true golden age for them. Perhaps that storied rivalry was why Professor Flitwick always seemed a bit friendlier towards Snape. Maybe he remembered how close it had been. Putting the pieces together, Harry couldn't help but grin at the thought of his godfather's antics. In his view, Sirius Black was like a supercharged Fred Weasley, far more elaborate in his pranks, while George always played the sensible sidekick. And now Harry was convinced that Sirius had been rallying his old schoolmates behind the scenes, plotting an unforgettable surprise for Harry's upcoming birthday at the end of the month. Harry felt as if the entire wizarding world had conspired to cut him off. He wasn't imagining it. He had solid proof that no one was reaching out anymore. First, there was the Daily Prophet. When Sirius became the paper's new owner, Harry had happily paid an extra galleon as a deposit to have each issue delivered by Owl. It wasn't expensive, and thanks to the Prophet's transformation enchantments, updating its headlines and features throughout the day, it was like getting 2 editions for the price of 1. Until recently, an owl would arrive every morning without fail. Now, nothing. No owl. No paper. And Harry knew that if anyone could make the Prophet vanish from his porch, it would be Sirius. But Sirius would never do that. Second, there was Ron. Harry knew how easy it was to get distracted. Holidays at the Burrow could be riotously fun, but Ron had a brand new Nimbus 2000 just sitting in his trunk. Harry had promised it as a surprise replacement in his Christmas letters for the past 3 years. The broomstick was paid for, polished, and practically begging to be flown. There was no way Ron could have forgotten it was there. And third, most unsettling of all, was the reply Harry received when he tried to write to Hermione. He hadn't even gotten to pour out his worries before an owl arrived, bearing only a scrap of parchment stamped with the ministry's seal. Your message cannot be delivered at this time. Please try again later. An automated response. No personal note, no reassurance, nothing. Alone in his room at number 12, Grimmauld Place, Harry sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his quill. The silence outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. Every unanswered owl, every missing newspaper, every form letter reply convinced him more firmly. The magical world, and all his friends in it, had turned their back on him. And Harry Potter, son of Lily and James, the boy who lived, was on his own once again. He had sent dozens of letters via seaweed, and some had even drawn automated replies, little after-sales messages from Skywalker Workshop, for instance. But in the last few weeks, his mailbox had gone stubbornly silent. There was only one explanation. Heidi's letter had never reached him. She wasn't hurt. No injured owl had ever fallen from the sky, so someone he knew must have intercepted it. And if that was true, then the date she'd given, July 21st, couldn't be trusted. To maintain the ruse, they'd simply delay the real rescue until he ended the month, perhaps even staging a birthday party to lure him into thinking everything was on schedule. It might not be just Ron, Draco, and Sirius coming for him this time. Who knew how many others would turn up? A mixture of disappointment and cautious hope churned in his chest as the days slipped away. Before he knew it, the calendar read July 18th, 3 days past the original date. It was easily the hottest day of the summer so far. The square, stucco houses of Privet Drive lay in a drowsy hush, their glossy cars parked in driveways and baking under the harsh sun. Lawns that had once been lush and green were now yellow and brittle. The neighborhood was under a strict watering ban, and sprinklers had been silent for weeks. Harry stood at the edge of the pavement, sweating through his shirt, and tried to imagine what, or who, was really coming for him at month's end. The residents of Privet Drive were usually out washing cars or mowing lawns at this hour, but today's relentless heat had driven everyone indoors. They sat behind closed windows, hoping for a breeze that never came. Harry lay flat in the flower bed outside number 4, sheltering from the sun under a dense cluster of hydrangeas. He wasn't hiding because he'd been banished or gotten into trouble. He simply needed to escape his cousin Dudley's relentless and awkward friendliness. Ever since Sirius Black and his friends had played their pranks, Dudley seemed convinced that Harry was completely ignored and that he, Dudley, was the only one who cared. So he hovered around Harry with a forced smile and a series of cringeworthy offers. "Want some more bacon? You're so skinny," Dudley would say at breakfast. "Harry, I've got something in my room you might like. Shall I go get it?" "Harry, do you want me to call Pierre," Dudley's former friend who'd lost touch after going to Hogwarts, "and give him a good thrashing so you can blow off some steam?" Every time, Harry forced a polite smile and declined. The worst part was that Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, who usually pretended to side with Harry whenever Dudley got out of hand, just sat by quietly, letting Dudley pester his cousin with no pushback. So here Harry stayed, folded into the cool shade of the hydrangeas, determined to wait out Dudley's next overbearing attempt at kindness and the stifling summer heat. Harry could hardly make sense of Aunt Petunia's behavior. From the things she'd let slip, it wasn't that she didn't care for him, she was simply envious of him and the magic he'd inherited from his mother. And Uncle Vernon's sudden change of heart only added to Harry's confusion. Although Vernon was usually henpecked by his wife, he could be stubbornly unyielding when it mattered. Could it be that he'd caught wind of Sirius's vast fortune, and that he owned the largest newspaper in the country? Chapter 245, The Unusually Pristine Malfoy Manor. A shrill cry split the morning air. Draco Malfoy sat in his favorite armchair by the window, arms crossed, glaring at the white peacock pacing outside. He'd never understood how something so elegant could make such an ear-splitting noise. Blinking against the bright sunlight streaming through the window, he rubbed his forehead. Something about the house felt off. He stood and surveyed the grand entry hall. Polished marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Every banister, every tapestry, every silver doorknob shone as though they'd never seen dust. Draco had always expected his home to be immaculate. It was the Malfoys, after all. But this was beyond even his exacting standards. It all started when he'd intervened the other day, warning Dobby not to harm himself. Within hours, the house had transformed. His parents had flooded him with praise. "Draco, my son, such persuasive words. Ever since you told Dobby to take better care, he's been tireless." Tireless, yes, but wasn't there something unbalanced about it? Draco knew Dobby's nature, a house elf driven nearly mad by thoughts of freedom. Each time the idea flared, Dobby had punished himself. Now, it seemed, he'd channeled that desperation into scrubbing and polishing, an obsessive crusade against every speck of dirt. Draco paced across the flawless floor, boots clicking on stone. He hesitated at the bottom of the grand staircase. Should he free Dobby at last? A part of him feared the elf's unsteady mind, but another part felt guilt. Was he keeping Dobby's tortured spirit captive under the guise of cleanliness? He sighed, straightened his robe, and reached for the silver bell on the side table. He would summon Dobby and decide, for both their sakes, once and for all. Draco replayed his father's words in his mind as if they'd been whispered just moments ago. We're doing this for Dobby's own good. An expelled house elf can't simply stroll into a new position, especially one who insists on wages. That rationale, meant to ease Draco's conscience, only stirred deeper questions. What was really troubling him? Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the celebrated hero of the wizarding world. Handsome, brilliant, and already the most talked-about seeker in Hogwarts history. Everyone rushed to claim his friendship. Draco even knew Harry was being groomed to captain the Ravenclaw Quidditch team, and, of course, that he'd defeated Voldemort in single combat. Standing next to someone so extraordinary made Draco wonder, am I truly worthy of his friendship? His doubts grew sharper when he considered his own heritage, his father, a devoted Death Eater, and Voldemort's right hand. Contrast that with Ron Weasley's family, his father, a respected member of the Order of the Phoenix and a hero in his own right. Ron's lineage was a banner of honor throughout the wizarding community. Draco found himself comparing every detail of his life to Ron's, and every comparison left him wanting. Lately, his unease had only deepened. It had been 10 days since he'd waved goodbye to Harry and Ron at the Dursleys, and not a single owl had arrived for him. He'd even received a cheerful postcard from Ron, who didn't need to wonder if he measured up, while Harry remained silent. Draco forced himself to believe they hadn't forgotten him. Deep down, though, he worried they had left him behind. Ron was every bit as anxious as Draco, though the Slytherin had no idea. In Draco's mind, Ron was perfectly entitled to be one of Harry's closest friends, but Ron himself didn't feel worthy. Far from boasting, he thought his father's reputation as the illustrious Arthur Weasley and Harry's extraordinary fame only highlighted his own ordinariness. Now he found himself in the same uneasy state as Draco, convinced that Harry had quietly dropped him in favor of some secret alliance with the Slytherin. Of course, Ron's situation differed in one key respect. He had a big, busy family to lean on, at least in theory. The Weasleys weren't wealthy by any measure, but there were enough of them that Ron hesitated to voice his doubts. Charlie and Bill were off working abroad, and between the chores and the chatter of Mum, Dad, Fred, George, Percy, and Ginny, Ron's feelings went unnoticed. He certainly couldn't confide in Ginny. He was her older brother, after all, and swore himself to a stiff upper lip. Besides, she'd already broken down, convinced she'd driven Harry away, and Ron couldn't bear to add to her sorrow. That was why Mrs. Weasley had hurried back to the burrow as soon as she dropped off Fred, George, and Percy. Ginny was home, too distraught to make the journey. Left alone with her tears, she could only mourn the friendship she feared she'd lost. And Ron, caught between loyalty and doubt, was left to stew in silence, convinced that Harry's sudden coldness was a betrayal he could not repair. Percy had spent the entire holiday holed up in his books, scarcely venturing outside the burrow. Ron had no one to confide in. Percy wouldn't dream of breaking his study routine. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were consumed by work, house chores, their various hobbies, and doting on Ginny, so Ron's growing gloom went largely unnoticed. Fred and George, however, were quick to spot a worrying sign. Hedwig hadn't arrived in their aviary for several days. The twins seized on the possibility that the Dursleys were intercepting Harry's mail. After all, they'd already broken the law once by preventing him from returning to Hogwarts. With Ron poised on the edge of despair, they urged him to take action. That afternoon, Ron wrote to Draco Malfoy at Malfoy Manor in Wiltshire using the family's new owl, Juvijon. Errol was simply too elderly and unreliable for important deliveries these days. Sirius Black and Arthur Weasley had even used the excuse of testing enchantments on Muggle items to insist the Weasleys bring in a sturdier bird. The letter read, "Dear Draco, weren't we all supposed to meet at Sirius's on the 21st with Harry? His birthday is on the 31st, and I want to be sure you've been in touch with him about our plans. Please let me know as soon as you can. Yours, Ron Weasley." With that small step taken, Ron felt, perhaps for the first time in weeks, that he might actually hear from Harry again. Ron's letter recently. I haven't heard from Harry by Owl. Have you received any post from him? If neither of us has, I'm starting to suspect the Dursleys are intercepting our letters. Please let me know as soon as you can. If need be, I'll get Sirius involved. Your Hogwarts classmate, Ron Weasley. Draco Malfoy read the parchment aloud with a triumphant smirk. Ha! Harry hasn't received my letters either. He tossed the missive onto a plush crimson cushion. How am I falling behind Ron Weasley in Owl correspondence? He pressed his pale fingers to his temples. Of course, it must be the Dursleys again. He leaned back on his chaise lounge and grinned. Dobby, I want to reply to Ron immediately. With that command, a petite creature with bat-like ears and gleaming, marble-bright eyes appeared with a pop. The house elf dipped low in a reverent bow. Draco snapped his fingers, and in an instant a fine sheet of parchment, a silver-tipped quill, an ivory ink pot, and an envelope materialized on the mahogany writing desk. Thank you, Dobby, Draco said crisply as the elf disappeared in a swirl of cloth. He set to work composing his reply, eager to expose the Dursleys' meddling and reassure his friend. Meanwhile, not far away, Harry Potter lay sprawled in the flower bed outside number 4, Privet Drive. He watched the passers-by with a mixture of boredom and longing as the afternoon sun warmed the petals around him. He wondered, would he ever hear from Ron and the others before the end of the month? A sudden crackling in his ear pulled him from his thoughts. Harry sat up, scanning the street. Had a passing car sprung a tire? Or was it something else? The next moment, Harry nearly screamed. A house elf! If Ron and the others hadn't been so curious about elf slavery and gone investigating afterward, he might have sworn it woe, as some kind of little monster. He knew that house elves were only found in the grand old wizarding families, and only a few names sprang to mind. The Blacks, the Malfoys, and... Am I missing someone? Certainly not the Weasleys. Molly had long wished for an elf to help with her ironing, but elves only served in ancient manor houses and castles, and the Weasleys owned neither. Harry took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. The elf's huge, round eyes brimmed with tears as it stared up at him. Hello, Harry said gently, clearing his throat. Were you sent by Sirius? After all, neither Draco nor Ryan would have any reason or permission to send an elf to him. If someone was trying to contact Harry through house elves, it could only be Sirius. Chapter 246, Dobby's Warning. Harry had never encountered anything so troublesome. A tiny, trembling house elf stood before him, making an infernal fuss. Please, just hear me out, Harry began, exasperated. Never, never, the elf sobbed, lowering its thin nose until it almost touched the ground. Harry hesitated. Why was this elf so terrified? He vaguely remembered the Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures had issued guidelines to protect house elves from mistreatment, though perhaps those rules only addressed outright abuse. Maybe this creature had simply been ignored and humiliated until it lost all dignity. He frowned. Could the elf belong to Sirius Black's household? No, Sirius had always treated his house elves kindly, even if the rest of the Black family had a dark reputation. Harry shook his head and tried to steady his own confusion, but the poor thing kept sobbing as if its very life depended on it. After what felt like an eternity, the elf finally choked out, Honored Harry Potter, I swear, I am not sent by any Mr. Black you mentioned. Harry blinked. Honored? I'm just an 11-year-old wizard. Please, sit. Please, sir, sit down on the grass, the elf pleaded, its voice quivering so badly it was a wonder it had any breath left. Embarrassed at his abrupt stance, Harry nodded and lowered himself beside the trembling creature. There, he said gently. Now, start from the beginning. Who are you, and why are you so afraid? Please. The elf's voice trembled with such excitement that he looked on the verge of fainting. No wizard has ever let Dobby sit like an equal. Harry blinked. The name struck him as oddly familiar. Your name is Dobby? He asked gently. But Dobby hadn't even heard. He was hiccuping so violently he looked like a misshapen puppet. At last he forced himself to steady his breath, then gazed at Harry with huge, tear-filled eyes full of wonder. Harry settled onto the edge of the sofa and studied him. Why did your master send you here? He ventured. He knew house elves were forbidden to leave their employer's service without explicit permission. Even their magic required authorization. Master? Dobby shook so hard the tea tray rattled. Oh no, sir, they don't know I've come. Panic flooded his voice. Dobby will punish himself 10 times over for disobedience. No, 100 times. If they find out, sir. Harry held up a hand. It sounds as if your master treats you well enough, he remarked calmly. But still, how did you manage to leave without their permission? Not good, Dobby protested, shaking his head so fiercely his floppy ears flapped. Suddenly he bent at the waist, as if about to bow his head to the floor, then jerked back upright, tears welling in his eyes. Bad Dobby, he wailed. Harry leaned forward, concern softening his gaze. Dobby, he said, you're not bad. You just wanted to warn me. It's all right. For a moment, the house elf stood frozen, as though waiting to see if Harry would change his mind. Then, with one final hiccup, Dobby sank gratefully onto the edge of the sofa, exactly the seat Harry had offered, and covered his face with his hands, overcome by relief. Harry watched in astonishment as the small house elf clutched his ears. Bad Dobby, the elf wailed. Dobby must punish himself. Harry frowned. This was nothing like the house elves he'd read about. Here was Dobby, wringing his hands, berating himself and punctuating every apology with self-flagellation. What's wrong, Dobby? Harry asked gently. The elf's large eyes darted nervously to the door, as though fearing eavesdroppers. Mistress, my masters, would not allow it, Dobby whispered, voice trembling. So when Dobby must punish himself, they order him to scrub the house instead. Harry's eyebrows rose. Dobby's masters clearly weren't kind. Did someone come here to harm me? He asked, leaning forward. Dobby blinked rapidly. Yes, sir. Your master's family is plotting against Harry Potter. That is why Dobby had to come. Harry pressed his lips together, recalling the confidence he'd earned as the boy who lived, the hero of the wizarding world. Your master's family? He repeated. Then you came here to warn me, even though you were ordered not to? The elf dipped his head gravely. Yes, sir. My little master. He is different from the rest of the family. He admired Dobby, but now his family conspires against you. Dobby feared you might be harmed, so he disobeyed. Harry held up a hand, his mind racing. So they plan to attack me, and you've come despite their orders. Dobby's voice quivered with relief at the confirmation. Yes, Harry Potter, there is a conspiracy. Harry squared his shoulders. Then we'll stop it. Come on, Dobby, tell me everything. And with that, the unlikely pair settled down in the dim corridor, the house elf's confession lighting the way to what would surely be a dangerous confrontation. There's going to be a dangerous person at Hogwarts this year, Dobby whispered, his whole body trembling. I've known about it for some time, sir. Master Harry Potter mustn't take any risks. He's far too important. Harry frowned. Danger? You mean Voldemort? Surely you're talking about the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. But we have Professor Dumbledore, arguably the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever seen. He exhaled in relief as Dobby's ears drooped with worry. Of course Dobby would be anxious. It was a child's instinct to sense something amiss. Yet Harry couldn't help but wonder, was this new professor truly a threat to Voldemort? And then it struck him. Sirius hadn't mentioned anything in his letters, but the clues had been there all along. With Professor Quirrell's death, Hogwarts had saved a tidy sum in salary. No doubt Dumbledore, ever resourceful despite his righteous reputation, had decided to economize by hiring someone under a vexing enchantment. After all, he'd already shown himself clever enough to hide a strategic twist beneath his upright exterior, just as Harry had learned the hard way last year. Harry's jaw tightened as Dobby dabbed at his eyes with a grubby pillowcase. I'm sorry, Harry Potter, Dobby whispered, voice trembling. Dobby can't say more. Harry raised an eyebrow. Then what is it you know? He pressed. Dobby took a shuddering breath. A few weeks ago, Harry Potter faced him again. That devil. And Harry Potter won. His huge round eyes brimmed with tears. Harry is brave, more than any of us deserve. But Harry's life is precious above all else. He paused, wiping his cheeks again. Dobby, I'll work myself to exhaustion, just to send Harry Potter this warning. You cannot return to Hogwarts. Harry's frown deepened. That's absurd. Ron's there, Hermione's there, Draco even, waiting for me in the castle. But the danger, Dobby began, his tone urgent. If what you're saying is true, I need to get there more than ever, Harry shot back. My friends. Friends? Dobby's voice grew sharp. Harry Potter hasn't even received one letter. Your friends left you nothing but cruel jokes. Harry stepped forward, incredulous. Cruel jokes? What do you mean? Dobby's voice turned conspiratorial. Bewitchments slipped into every owl post. They laughed at your worry. Dobby fears you trust them too much. Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Harry's eyes narrowed as he searched Dobby's tear-streaked face for answers. If the house elf knew more, he would have to find out, no matter the cost. Dobby couldn't lie to the great Harry Potter. I intercepted every single one of your letters, he announced, pulling a thick stack of envelopes from the makeshift pillowcase he'd been carrying. Harry's eyes narrowed. Give them back, he said coolly. Dobby doesn't know why the Ministry of Magic never warned you for using underage magic, the house elf continued, voice trembling. But if I keep your letters, you might decide not to go to Hogwarts. Harry folded his arms. Dobby, you can't stop me from going to Hogwarts. Dobby shuffled his feet, rubbing them against the floorboard. Ards. Also, Dobby hid your Hogwarts letter and your school supplies in the little cupboard under the stairs. That's not a cupboard, Harry said, softening despite himself. It's my old bedroom, Dobby admitted. Dobby thought you might be safer at home. Harry crouched to meet the elf's hopeful gaze. He reached out, took the letters, and let them flutter to the floor at his feet. Dobby, I appreciate that you're trying to protect me, he said gently. But I need to go to Hogwarts. That's where I belong. Dobby's big eyes filled with tears. Dobby only wants what's best for Harry Potter. Harry slipped the envelopes into his coat pocket. I know, Dobby, but sometimes doing what's right means taking a few risks. He paused, then tapped the cupboard door with a grin. Now help me open that cupboard. I think there's a school trunk in there with my name on it. A look of pure delight spread across Dobby's face. Yes, Harry Potter. Dobby is so happy. And together they climbed the steps to retrieve Harry's first Hogwarts delivery, proof that, no matter how tangled up in magic and misunderstandings, Harry's path led him straight to the heart of the wizarding world. Chapter 247. Creature Harry had never imagined a creature so pitiful as this trembling little elf. How cruel its existence. All his life, he'd assumed that house elves were joyful helpers, bound to serve wizarding families in grand old manners, obedient, devoted, and content, unless their masters chose to set them free. But Dobby bore no resemblance to that ideal. He looked more like a frightened child forced into bondage. No holidays, no dignity, and no kindness, only relentless orders and the sting of punishment. Harry's heart ached at the sight. In that small, quivering figure, he recognized echoes of his own childhood, a boy who had known only fear, felt powerless to speak up, and learned only to endure. Dobby, Harry said gently, crouching to the elf's level, your master only meant to adjust how many times you clean the house. There's no need to finish every chore in a single day. Dobby's enormous eyes brimmed with tears. He bowed his head, voice cracking. Master demanded. Dobby thought if he cleaned faster he'd be freed. So Dobby. His voice broke into sobs. Harry realized then that Dobby had intercepted one of his letters, hid the gifts from his owl post, out of fear and a desperate hope for freedom. And despite that betrayal, Harry's concern only deepened. He offered Dobby a reassuring smile. You did it because you were afraid. But I'm here now, and I promise to help you. Start by telling me everything, no matter how terrible it was. The elf trembled but nodded. In halting whispers he recounted the endless cleaning, the merciless punishments, the nights spent locked away in dark cupboards. With each detail, Harry's resolve hardened. He would protect Dobby. He would not allow another innocent soul to suffer in silence. Dobby's voice trembled as he looked up at Harry, tears shining in his big, round eyes. Sir, Dobby has known your greatness for so long, but your kindness, Dobby never dreamed of such kindness. He choked back a sob, then, almost in panic, pressed a folded parchment into Harry's hand. Harry Potter, Dobby must go now. If you return to Hogwarts, please watch out for strangers. He didn't wait for Harry's reply. There was a sudden crack of sound, like a thunderclap and a billow of wind. In an instant, Dobby was gone, and Harry found himself alone on the rocky hillside, the parchment fluttering in his grip. Dobby? Harry called, but only the echo of his own voice answered him. Frowning, he opened the letter. Meanwhile, far from that wind-swept hill, Dobby hurtled through a tunnel of fractured time and space, an impossibly shifting corridor where walls folded in on themselves, and the wizarding world could neither see nor touch him. Strange pressures pressed from all sides, and darkness reigned, pierced only by the faint hum of magic. Suddenly, a sliver of light pierced the gloom. In the flash of radiance, Dobby reappeared in what must have been a grand hall, the Malfoy mansion, though everything around him felt distorted, as if reality itself were bending. Before him stood a figure wreathed in shimmering light, utterly impossible in form. No words passed through ordinary air, yet a clear voice filled Dobby's mind, warm and resonant. "Welcome, Dobby." The house elf's heart thundered. Despite the impossibility of this place, where time had no meaning and sound no medium, the voice was as clear as any spoken word. In that moment, Dobby knew he had stepped far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Dobby felt as light as air, his usual worries whisked away and replaced by a hazy, unnameable joy. Then a voice echoed from the farthest corner of his mind. "Why have you stopped advising Harry Potter?" So caught up in his bliss was Dobby that his answer came without hesitation. Harry Potter defeated that mysterious man all on his own. If he truly must return to Hogwarts, Dobby will not stand in his way. Dobby has already warned him that his teacher is in grave danger. Harry understands that now. The silhouette before him inclined its head in silent approval, and then melted away as suddenly as T had appeared. The next instant, Dobby was standing in the grand hallway of Malfoy Manor. Checking the clocks, he saw that no time had passed since Harry's family was due to arrive. It was as though the moments in between had been borrowed and returned without leaving a trace. Of course, the visitor had been Ryan. With his current level 6 thinking ability, Ryan could spin a perfectly logical reason for why Dobby's memories diverged from the original timeline. Yet even his cleverest explanations carried no true sense of involvement. Ever eager to remind others of his power, Ryan had simply dropped by, made his point, and vanished. Dobby, blissfully unaware of the trickery at play, straightened his frilled cuffs and prepared to carry on as if nothing unusual had happened. Apparition, in theory, can only be stopped by an anti-apparition ward. Once that barrier is up, no one can apparate into or out of the protected area unless they make physical contact with another apparating witch or wizard. But Ryan had discovered something extraordinary. He could slip into the apparition void on his own and even bend time while he was there. Today, he decided to show off that power by trapping Dobby in the void. Harry stood just off Privet Drive, still reeling from what he'd witnessed. Dobby was caught somewhere between worlds, unable to move as Ryan smirked and savored his victory. Then Harry heard it, the unmistakable roar of an engine. He whipped his head toward the street, only to find empty pavement and perfectly still hedges. "Harry!" came 3 voices, echoing oddly as if floating on the breeze. He blinked, heart pounding. "Ron, you forgot to switch off your invisibility booster," Sirius Black's calm voice chided. "You idiot," snarled Draco Malfoy. With a sudden puff of wind, a gleaming turquoise Ford Anglia materialized and hovered a few feet above the road. Ron Weasley's red head popped out of the front passenger window, eyes wide. Behind the wheel sat Sirius, knuckles white around the steering column, and Draco slouched in the back, glaring at Harry with that familiar Malfoy smirk. "Blimey, Harry, what's going on?" Ron shouted up at him. "Why haven't you replied to my letter? You could have at least let us know you were in trouble." Harry opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The whole world seemed to tilt as he realized nowhere was safe from Ryan's new power, not even the void between places. And now his friends had just crashed a flying car into the middle of it. "Is it the Dursleys?" Draco Malfoy's ears twitched at the question, though he deliberately turned his face away, feigning indifference. "If it is Vernon Dursley again, then I was far too lenient with him last time," and Sirius Black muttered, touching down the flying Ford Anglia smoothly on the grass outside the burrow. Draco's curiosity flared. "Harry, what's that in your hand? You haven't opened one of those letters yet, have you?" He peered out of the corner of his eye and spotted Harry clutching a neat stack of unopened envelopes. Harry hopped out of the car, nearly bouncing with excitement. "Nope, it's not Uncle Vernon," he said, ruffling through the letters. "But Draco, I admit, your guess was pretty close." He spotted Ron Weasley waiting nearby and flung his arms around him in a joyful hug. It had been weeks since they'd seen each other. Only then did Harry notice someone else seated in the back of the car, besides Draco, an unexpected figure, a house elf. The creature was slender and tiny, barely half the height of an adult wizard, with pale, creased skin and wisps of white hair sprouting from bat-like ears. It wore a simple garment that looked like a miniature pillowcase, far cleaner and more neatly patched than Dobby's usual attire. Harry stepped back, blinking in surprise. Beside Draco, the little elf stood perfectly still, large, dark eyes fixed on Harry and Ron as they reunited. Chapter 248, Dobby sent by Lucius Malfoy. And Sirius, Draco added in exasperation. At once, Creature fell silent, though the moment he thought no one was watching, his piggish snout drew in a disgruntled breath, and the muttering resumed. Harry stared in disbelief. This elf was the exact opposite of Dobby, cruel where Dobby was meek, spiteful where Dobby was humble. "Why aren't you?" Harry began, turning to Sirius. Sirius merely shrugged. "It's Molly. She trusts house elves more than she trusts me, especially behind the steering of an untested flying car." Harry's attention snapped to the windows of number 4 Privet Drive. The curtains had swung wide open, and the panes looked firmly sealed. Uncle Vernon must have spotted their arrival. Creature seized the moment to launch into another tirade. "The old blood traitor and his little cub. Creature can do nothing but protect them. My poor mistress, if she knew of this great betrayal, oh, how she'd shame me. What use am I to her now?" Decades of service had taught Creature to exploit every loophole in his master's instructions. Dobby, with all his bravery, could never match such cunning. Harry's fist curled around the edge of the car seat as Creature's voice rose again. "Shut up, Creature!" Harry snapped. Silence fell, broken only by the distant creak of wrought iron gates swinging open. The old drawing room at number 12, Grimmauld Place, was deathly quiet, save for Creature's hushed muttering. At last, Sirius slammed his fist on the scarred wooden table. "Enough! Don't you dare mention my mother!" He whirled on the trembling elf. "And keep my godson's name out of your mouth, too. No Ron, no Weasley family." Creature's drooping ears and downcast eyes made it clear he wouldn't defy Sirius again, at least not right away. The rest of the group watched him warily. Sirius turned to Harry. "He's gone mad, cooped up here. You heard him babbling about orders from the portrait of Mrs. Black, talking to himself like I've never seen before." Ron crossed his arms. "All I want to know is, why would a house elf try to stop me from going back to Hogwarts? He's practically worshipped me ever since I saved him, so why warn me away from my own school?" Harry shrugged. "Dangerous, you say? You know who's not half the match for you, Ron. I'd bet my wand that this elf's master is just some spoilt child who's never set foot at Hogwarts." Draco Malfoy, leaning against a battered chair, smirked and gave a perfunctory nod. Probably a first-year brat who thinks he's got a claim on the place before term even starts. Sirius raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps, but house elves have their secret networks. Word travels fast. Harry, do you even know this elf's name?" Harry jabbed a finger at Creature. "Speak up, then. What's your name and who's your master?" Creature trembled so violently the chains on his ankles rang together. He managed a pitiful squeak. "My master, after he returned from Azkaban, began issuing me orders. He speaks of my mistress with great reverence." His tiny face twisted in pain as he glanced at the portrait of Mrs. Black hanging on the wall. "He claims she'll doom us all if we refuse." Harry exchanged a look with Ron. "Hold on, he was in Azkaban too? And now he's still bound to her portrait?" Sirius's eyes gleamed. What kind of elf could survive Azkaban's dementors and return so devoted? And who is this mysterious master? Creature whimpered. "I dare not speak his name. He forbade it." Ron's jaw clenched. "Then we'll find another way. We can't let someone, anything, blackmail the house elves into scaring me off." A tense hush fell. Outside, the wind rattled the windows of Grimmauld Place as if echoing their unease. Internally, they all understood the same thing. A new threat was rising behind these walls, and it was up to them to unmask it before Hogwarts, and everyone in it was drawn into something far more dangerous than any defense against the dark arts class. "Old Creature will obey only the orders of the prodigal son," the house elf muttered in a sour voice. Sirius merely raised an eyebrow. Creature went on, voicing every sarcastic complaint he'd ever had. If Madame learned that the young master had blown through a fortune as soon as he returned, let alone the rumors that he was a murderer, She'd disown him again, Kreacher swore. Sirius let the tirade wash over him like a breeze. As long as the elf kept his opinions to the boy in question, he didn't mind. Harry, Ron, and Draco leaned forward, curiosity written on their faces. Who was this little master everyone spoke of? Ron wrinkled his nose. I hope it's not a little girl, he muttered. If Ginny found out, she'd be in tears. Harry glanced at him. His name is Dobby. Draco and Ron both sucked in a breath. Ron a split second too late. Dobby? Draco repeated, eyebrows shooting up. Harry, are you sure? Harry blinked, bewildered. He looked from Draco to Ron as if they were speaking a foreign language. Sirius, equally perplexed, shot Kreacher a sharp look. Without a word, the old elf scuttled forward, ready at last to explain who Dobby truly was. Lucky Dobby, unlike poor old Kreacher, bound to serve rude, rebellious young masters. Kreacher's shriveled face, usually alight with contempt for Sirius, now twisted with envy. Lucky, you say? Dobby works himself to the bone, and his mistress does nothing but encourage him, orders him to do still more. Harry frowned. Ron and Draco, who had been standing at his side, opened their mouths to explain, but Harry's puzzled look kept them silent. I don't understand, he said. What's so wrong with Dobby wanting freedom, especially when he's treated poorly? The house elf's nostrils flared. He spat onto the stone floor. Dobby disgraced himself. A shameless wretch, always yammering about freedom. Harry's voice grew steady. Dobby showed courage when it mattered. He saved me at the Malfoy Manor. If anyone deserves freedom, it's him. At this, Kreacher recoiled as though Harry had spoken Voldemort's name. He pounded a fist on a nearby chair. Harry Potter! House elves have no right to be unhappy, no right to question their master's treatment. Kreacher would never stoop to that level. Harry said nothing. The only sound was the crackle of the fire as he wrestled with the old elf's bitterness, and with the knowledge that, if Kreacher was ever to understand the value of liberty, it would take more than words to change his heart. Kreacher's shoulders sagged, and he stared up at Harry with mournful gray eyes. Kreacher is ashamed of this freedom, he croaked. Think what Mistress Sissy and Master Draco will say if they learn there's an elf serving them, and our mistress must never know. Kreacher has no choice but to serve his master. Harry exchanged a look with Draco. Draco? Draco's lips twisted in a wry half-smile. Dobby belongs to you now, Harry. Harry turned back to the house elf. Did you send Dobby to intercept these letters? Kreacher bowed his head. Yes, Kreacher sent him, but he did not send him to this place himself. Draco frowned, rubbing his temple. And I still don't know who will be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts next term. Sirius slammed a hand on the table, making the parchment quiver. It has to be Lucius Malfoy, he declared. I knew he was trying to cut you off from Harry's world. He's the only one who made such a fuss, Sirius continued. Last time, he insisted the post had to stay within the Malfoy family. Ron, who'd been holding back, pointed to 2 letters clutched in Harry's arms, his own messy handwriting on the envelopes. What about mine? Lucius was just talking about arranging a marriage with the Parkinsons. He's clearly blocking these, too. Harry looked down at the letters, then back at the house elf and his friends. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing mail, Dobby's secret missions, and Lucius Malfoy's relentless meddling. Now, more than ever, they had to find a way to keep in touch and see who would stand in that dreaded defense classroom next year. He must have been afraid I'd object, so he severed your back lines of communication first, mine and Harry's included. Sirius shrugged. Or maybe Dobby intercepted all of Harry's letters himself, making sure you couldn't pass messages through anyone else. Draco frowned. I always wondered why he never tried to stop me from writing to Harry. Now I see, he had this trick up his sleeve all along. He glanced away for a moment. Father's been pressuring me all day to get in touch with Pansy, too. He reminded himself that house elves could never act on their own, and Dobby was no exception without an explicit order from his master. Chapter 249, Dobby's Stand, Lucius Malfoy. What kind of man was he, really? Voldemort's devoted servant? The proud head of the Goo family? The patriarch of one of Wizarding England's oldest pureblood houses? Draco knew the answer, all of the above. Unlike the Weasleys, whose sprawling family tree brimmed with children and grandchildren, Malfoy's had always been traced along a single, unbroken line. That was why Lucius, as its head, obsessed over ensuring the family's future. More than anything else, he feared his only son might one day follow Dumbledore's example, an outcome his father would stop at nothing to prevent. So to Draco, his father's latest maneuver was only par for the course. What Gryffindors might see as outright betrayal was for a Slytherin simply good strategy. "Draco, Sirius, you're both mistaken," Harry said, stepping forward. "Dobby never told me that his young master sent him here. He said he came of his own accord." Ron and Sirius exchanged startled glances. He went on to say that his master had stopped him from harming himself, and hinted that his master isn't what he used to be. A bad person, in other words. Ron shook his head. "What would a house elf do, Harry? Are you sure you've got that right?" Sirius raised an eyebrow in agreement, but Harry held his ground. The implications were too important to dismiss. If Dobby truly acted on his own, driven by fear or conscience, then the web of Malfoy lies was beginning to unravel, and the stakes were higher than ever. Harry, Ron, Sirius, Draco, and Kreacher were gathered in the drawing room of number 12, Grimmauld Place. The conversation had turned, as it so often did these days, to the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Rumored to be so dangerous, even Lucius Malfoy disapproved of him. "If it's Dobby who told us," Draco said, head held high, "it's entirely credible. My father sits on Hogwarts' Board of Governors. He knows everything going on at that school." Kreacher's voice shrilled at once. "Preposterous! How dare Dobby presume to speak of his masters that way? He should be ashamed of himself." "Enough, Kreacher," Sirius snapped. With another high-pitched whine, the house elf fell silent, though his bulbous gray eyes still glowed with outrage. Ron exchanged a doubtful glance with Harry. "Well, if both Draco and Kreacher agree, maybe it could be true," he admitted, "but I'm not convinced. I mean, our family doesn't even have an elf. If someone told me my own elf could build a broomstick, I'd probably believe it straight away." Harry tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Why don't we just ask Dobby himself?" They all turned toward the staircase. Draco folded his arms. "Fine. Dobby," he called. There was a soft click, and Dobby appeared at Draco's side, head bowed. He hesitated, then lifted his eyes to Harry with a mournful, pleading look, but said nothing. Draco snorted. "See? Dobby's a bad elf, not even willing to answer a direct question." Sirius gave Draco a sharp look, but said nothing. Ron frowned, still uncertain. Harry kept his eyes on Dobby, determined to hear the truth, whatever it was. Kreacher's dark eyes flicked from Dobby to Draco Malfoy, contempt dripping from every word. "He was treated kindly by my old master's pure-blood grandnephew," the house elf sneered, "and yet he betrayed the family. So blessed he is and so ungrateful, Kreacher would much rather serve Master Malfoy." Dobby cowered in the corner, shame-faced and trembling. Draco leaned back, one pale eyebrow arching. "Dobby, what are you doing here?" he asked calmly, though he already knew the answer from Harry's frantic explanation. He simply enjoyed watching the elf squirm. "Horrible, Dobby. Honest, Dobby." The little elf's voice cracked as he clasped his hands, knuckles white. He took a trembling step forward, then froze, as if physically restrained by Draco's stare. Gathering what courage he could muster, he blurted out, "I came to warn Lord Potter. To keep him safe, sir." Draco's lips curved in a mocking half-smile. "Protect Harry? The boy isn't even a Mac. H for you-know-who." Dobby's long fingers twisted together, and he glanced up with desperate eyes. "That man is very dangerous, sir. Dobby heard it from his master, and Harry Potter, he's the little master's friend." Draco nodded slowly, amusement flickering in his gray eyes. "Then tell me this, elf. How did you manage to intercept my owl? You know house elves cannot disobey their master's orders, let alone steal and hide his letters." Dobby bowed his head so low his ears almost touched the floor. Dobby had no choice, sir. My master spoke of danger around Lord Potter. Dobby could not stand by and do nothing." A silence fell. Kreacher let out a low snarl, but Draco held up a hand to still him. The young master's expression remained inscrutable, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. In that moment, Dobby realized that, against all odds, he had made an impression on the Malfoy heir, and that his loyalty to Harry Potter had just cost him everything, and perhaps saved everything in return. Ron's eyes widened. He'd never imagined house elves capable of such skullduggery. Dobby admitted, quite proudly, that he'd intercepted every letter addressed to Harry Potter, and then turned a blind eye to anything sent from his little master. No wonder Harry and Draco Malfoy had been able to carry on correspondence. According to Dobby, he simply couldn't bring himself to seize messages from the Malfoys, so he'd focused entirely on Potter's mail. "All for Harry Potter's sake," Dobby squealed. "I intercepted the boy who lived's letters." "Old creature, you're a disgrace," Creature hissed, his withered face flushing a rare, furious red. "And how dare you speak ill of the great Harry Potter?" With ears flat against their heads, Dobby and Creature tumbled onto the lawn of number 4, Privet Drive, each determined to prove the other's worthlessness. "Creature mustn't insult Harry Potter in front of Dobby, or Dobby will teach you a lesson." Dobby shrieked, flailing wildly. Creature jabbed an ancient finger at him. "I'll call Harry Potter any name I please, you overweening fool." Horrified, Ron stumbled backward. He'd always known house elves were peculiar, but he'd never imagined them at each other's throats over Hogwarts mail. Creature crouched in the corner, muttering under his breath as he rifled through more intercepted letters. Dobby's large eyes narrowed. "You have no right to mock your master or hide his mail, Creature," he hissed. "Just wait until my mistress hears of this." Before Creature could protest, Dobby lunged forward and slammed his stubby fist against the older elf's face. There was a sickening crunch as Creature's jaw snapped shut, and half his teeth went with it. Creature howled, clutching his wounded mouth. "Enough!" Draco Malfoy stepped between them, voice ringing with authority. "Creature, Dobby, I forbid you to fight any longer." Both house elves froze. Dobby straightened, glaring at Creature. "Yes, young master." Creature, spitting fragments of broken teeth, lowered his head. Although he still trembled with anger, he dared not disobey the pure-blood grandnephew of his old master. Ron burst out laughing. "Well, Harry, looks like somebody really cares about you," he teased, nodding at Dobby's protective glare. Draco shot Ron a puzzled look, then turned to Harry. "Who is this person you fear so much that even the elves tremble at his name? One of your Defense Against the Dark Arts professors?" Harry shook his head. "No one from Hogwarts." He hesitated, glancing at the quivering Dobby. "It's someone else, someone my father warned me about." Dobby's face went pale. He swallowed hard as he steeled himself to speak. "Young master, I dare not utter his name, but he is the one Harry Potter defeated some time ago." He faltered, terror replacing his earlier bravado. Even Creature, rubbing his sore jaw, watched in uneasy silence. The weight of unspoken danger settled over the room, leaving every wand hand twitching at the prospect of what, or who, might come next. "Sirius, you've lost your mind," Harry exclaimed, though Sirius's words had hit him just as hard. "He didn't capture Voldemort and make him our teacher for nothing," Sirius snapped. "That's how he avoids handing over a single galleon." Harry's jaw dropped. "Wait, are you saying the Dark Lord himself is our Defense Against the Dark Arts instructor?" Ron groaned. "No wonder the classes feel so off. He was teaching us last year and now he's back again this year." Draco turned to Dobby. "Is that true? Is it really him?" Dobby straightened, courage lighting his eyes. "Yes, sir. Master said it's the same man, using the name he had before he became you-know-who. Finally, we can speak it." At that moment, Creature's usual scowl softened. The house elf regarded Harry with an unexpected curiosity, his wrinkled mouth parting as though he had something to say. Shocked by the revelation, everyone else was too stunned to notice. Chapter 250. Free Dobby. Sirius Black felt like a complete failure. Ever since his best friend had died, he'd carried a crushing guilt with him, an atonement he believed could only be paid by self-inflicted suffering. Azkaban had seemed the fitting punishment, and for a time he toyed with the idea of never leaving its cold walls. Fate, however, had seen fit to clear him of all charges. Yet freedom brought no joy, only one persistent thought. He might as well die and join James in the afterlife. Forgiving himself felt impossible. Albus Dumbledore watched Sirius closely. "He certainly has James's looks," the headmaster said softly, "but there's something." Sirius cut him off, voice tight. He didn't need Dumbledore's observations. He only needed to know that a part of James lived on in young Harry. In Sirius's eyes, Harry was everything. It wasn't the first time Harry had come unhinged. During his first year at Hogwarts, he discovered that one of his professors was secretly bound to Voldemort's fragment of soul, and in his fury and fear had hurled every curse he could remember at Dumbledore. Unbeknownst to the others, Harry had almost irreparably wounded the headmaster that day, and now, it seemed, the same storm was brewing once more. Sirius forced himself to swallow the rising anger and plaster a calm expression across his sunken cheeks. "Harry," he said, voice deceptively steady, "we'll be heading over to Mr. Weasley's place in a little while. We'll fetch you after that, all right?" Ron and Draco stood off to the side, their faces white with shock. They had never seen Sirius Black look so determined or so haunted. Harry had no idea how eager Sirius had once been to fetch him from the burrow, and how abruptly that eagerness had vanished. Draco, on the other hand, could scarcely contain his delight. Staying with Harry meant more time under Arthur Weasley's roof, an opportunity he treasured. It was precisely this prospect that had persuaded Lucius Malfoy to release him. Lucius had assumed Draco would go to Sirius's house. Had he known his son was bound for the Weasleys, he never would have agreed. What Draco didn't realize was that only the sudden reappearance of a teenage Voldemort had forced Lucius into this arrangement. In his father's eyes, limiting Draco's contact with Harry or Ron was the only way to curb any unsavory influences. "Can I go now?" Harry asked, relief and excitement warring in his voice. He barely registered Sirius's pallid expression. After all, it had been years since his godfather had slept outside Azkaban's walls. Sirius cleared his throat. "Yes, Creature, stay with the Weasleys and obey Harry's every order. No exceptions." The house elf dipped into a deep bow. "Creature will obey, of course." Creature still bristled at the thought of remaining under the roof of what he considered a dirty-blooded traitor. Yet when his young master insisted he serve Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy's friend, he reluctantly acquiesced. In Creature's eyes, this new arrangement meant not serving Harry himself, but aligning once again with Draco through Harry. "Brilliant. We'll be under the same roof as Harry," Ron burst out in relief. He'd been dreading being on his own again. Draco, leaning back in his chair, rolled his eyes half in mockery, half in genuine complaint. "Sure, you two can bunk together. As for me, I get Goyle, Crabbe, and the rest of the Brute Squad. Lucky me, huh?" Before anyone could reply, a hush fell over the room, the happiest moment in Harry's life up to now. Sirius Black swept through the door of 4 Private Drive, wand lowered but smile broad as he strode forward. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia stood frozen in the hall, their faces slack with panic. They'd been hoping Sirius might come demanding trouble, not demanding Harry. "Aha, no, Harry, I mean," Vernon stammered, straightening his tie. "I simply can't bear the thought of you being gone that long. You'll come back in the spring, won't you?" "And Dudley," Petunia added hastily, wringing her hands, "he'll be perfectly safe at Hogwarts while you're away, won't he?" Dudley, summoned by his parents' voices, stumbled into the room only to gape at the carpet, utterly lost. Harry, meanwhile, sensed an odd flicker in Aunt Petunia's eyes, an emotion he couldn't yet name, before he turned to Sirius, ready at last to leave the Dursleys behind. He'd no doubt be stuck scrubbing the floors once they'd gone. 2 house elves, caked in grime, had been allowed to tromp all over Aunt Petunia's favorite rug, and Petunia looked positively on the verge of tears at the sight. Draco Malfoy lounged against the doorframe, smirking as Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia barked anxious orders at the elves. "So," he drawled, "Potter's due back tomorrow, isn't he? Or was it next term?" He stepped forward and gave one elf's foot a casual prod. "Tomorrow's better. You two can't be without him that long. Right, Petunia? Petunia, you'd miss dear Harry terribly, wouldn't you?" Petunia stared at him, her face draining of color. "Oh, yes, of course," she stammered. Vernon cleared his throat so loudly it sounded like a sneeze. "Wrong day. I mean, he won't be back until—" Draco raised a neat, mocking eyebrow. "Next semester. Not tomorrow." Vernon's forced chuckle died in his throat. His eyes narrowed as he regarded Draco, suddenly recognizing the same calculating menace he'd seen in Dudley's eyes these past years. Before he could recover his composure, a clatter on the path announced Sirius Black's arrival. Black lugged his battered trunk up the front step, Sword of Longbottom heirloom rolling behind him. At once, Dobby hurried forward, eager to relieve Sirius of some of the weight. But every time the elf glanced at Draco, his shoulders slumped. No invitation to help came from the boy, and he hung back, crestfallen. Creature, meanwhile, lingered near the doorway, chin raised in sour disapproval. Without his master present, he refused to serve anyone else. Sirius's sudden appearance seemed to give Uncle Vernon just the lifeline he needed. Clearing his throat, he bellowed, "All right, then. Goodbye, Harry." He awkwardly extended his right hand, as if to shake Harry's, but at the last moment he recoiled, balling his hand into a fist and tapping it nervously like a metronome. "Goodbye, Harry," he repeated. Ever eager, Dudley lunged forward and threw his arms around Harry in a surprisingly tight hug. Ron and the others jumped back, convinced an attack was coming. "Goodbye," Aunt Petunia mumbled curtly. With that final word, she, Vernon, Dudley, and his pet collie tumbled out the door, followed by the two house elves. Vernon slammed it shut behind them. Just as the Dursleys piled into their car and the engine roared to life, Dobby took a step forward, ready to follow them. But Draco intervened, placing a gentle hand on the elf's shoulder. "Dobby," he said softly, "I think you need something. Clothes." Dobby froze, eyes wide. "Master, what do you wish to give me?" "Clothes," Draco repeated, holding out a bundle of neatly folded pillowcases. Old Creature would be green with envy. Ron burst out before he could stop himself. "Draco, are you mad? Why would you do that? I've been waiting to have a house elf of my own." Draco simply smiled. "Because Dobby deserves better than endless servitude. Now go on, put them on." Trembling, Dobby accepted the garments. As he slipped them over his thin frame, a look of dawning astonishment and joy spread across his face. Freed at last, the little elf could scarcely believe his good fortune. Creature shuffled forward, rubbing at the thin, white hairs sprouting from his bat-like ears. He looked so old, Harry half expected him to crumble into dust. Even Sirius, forcing himself to stay calm, found his gaze drifting to Draco Malfoy, this boy who ought to have been Draco's nephew by all the family rules. Only now did he realize that Draco wasn't a proper Malfoy at all. Making friends with Harry Potter wasn't another family scheme. It was genuine. "No, Ron," Draco said quietly, cutting off Ron's protests. "If my father ever found out what Dobby's done, he'd have the elf killed." He turned to the trembling house elf. "Don't be afraid, Dobby. It's all for Harry Potter." Dobby's enormous eyes brimmed with tears. "Dobby is different. Dobby wants to be free." Draco kicked off his socks and held them out. "Here, this is what you asked for." With trembling hands, Dobby took the small velvet pouch Draco offered. "The young master is different. A good wizard, as kind as Harry Potter," the elf whispered. Then, pressing the pouch to his chest, he raised his head and declared in a clear, proud voice, "Dobby is free!" Chapter 251, A World Where Only Ron Gets Hurt. Creature's sharp voice cut through the quiet hall. "Oh, young Master Draco has taken to the most scandalous behavior. How shameless he is!" He jerked his head toward Dobby, as if the freed elf were a contagion to be avoided. Then he fell silent. No one paid him any mind. Draco drew in a slow breath, his voice tense. "Dobby. Dobby is free now," Creature sneered. "He may serve whoever he pleases, even this young master." At those words, Dobby's round eyes flashed. He beamed at Draco, two neat rows of teeth gleaming in his eager smile, and waited. "That's enough," Draco said, hoarsely but firmly. He stepped forward, meeting Dobby's bright gaze. "Dobby, will you come to Malfoy Manor? I need a house elf." Standing a few paces away, Ron's heart sank. He nearly spoke. "Dobby, I could use an elf at the Burrow," but he clamped his lips shut. He reminded himself, this wasn't his moment to interject. Draco raised an eyebrow at Dobby's expectant expression. "Once you've settled at the manor, you'll be welcome at Hogwarts if you wish. If any wizarding household can afford to pay an elf, it's Professor Dumbledore's." Dobby broke into a joyous clap, his ears twitching with delight. "Wonderful, a wise choice, little master. Who but Draco Malfoy would think to hire and fairly pay a house elf? Most wizards refuse outright, claiming paid service isn't the proper way. But you, sir, see the value in honest work." Creature huffed from the shadows. "Paying an elf? Preposterous. Where's the dignity in that?" But even he couldn't dampen Dobby's excitement. Ron watched them, a sharp pang twisting in his chest. Only he could feel this particular ache, wishing he'd offered Dobby a home first. But now Draco had spoken, and everything had changed in an instant. Creature's hollow voice echoed through the kitchen, his gnarled finger wagging at Dobby. "Dobby, you don't know that. Shame on you." Dobby straightened his patched tunic and puffed out his chest. But Master Creature, this way I can keep an eye on that person at Hogwarts and protect the little Master Harry Potter and Mr. Weasley. Ron huffed. It's Weasley, not Weezeye. How many times do I have to tell you? My name is Ron Weasley. Right, Mr. Weasley. Dobby nodded vigorously, as if finally committing Ron's name to memory. Harry exchanged a worried glance with Draco. Dobby, I'm grateful for your help, he began gently, but I'm more concerned about my father getting dragged into trouble because of this. Draco's expression grew stern. If what you're saying is true, Dobby, I order you to be extremely careful and to stay well clear of the younger version of that mysterious man once we arrive at Hogwarts. Harry added quietly, Yes, Dobby, you said, I am the great Harry Potter, but how could a youthful Tom Riddle ever threaten me? They both remembered last year's horrors. No student had been killed thanks to Dumbledore's protections, but trolls had rampaged and innocent unicorns had died. Next year, they feared, someone might try to use young Tom Riddle like a sacrificial pawn to break a curse. They couldn't allow a child's life to be put at risk, and Dobby, brave as he was, had no magic of his own. Dobby's ears drooped, his round eyes wide with concern. Dobby understands, sir. Dobby will be careful. Dobby will protect Master Harry and Mr. Weasley, no matter what. Harry reached out and ruffled the elf's hair. Thank you, Dobby. That's all we ask. In the hush that followed, even Creature seemed to straighten a little, as if hope had taken root among them all. The challenges of the coming school year would be great, but they would face them together. What if, in Dumbledore's eyes, I'm as expendable as that unicorn who died in vain? Harry wondered, though he knew there was no clear answer. Dobby is free. Dobby doesn't have to serve you any longer, the little house elf cried. And Dobby's going to Hogwarts. Before Harry, Ron, and Hermione could stop him, Dobby vanished in a swirl of bright magic. I still have things to say, Ron muttered, head bowed, staring at the spot where Dobby had stood. His disgruntled frown bore a surprising resemblance to Creature's most haughty scowl. Moments later, the five of them climbed into the enchanted turquoise car. Harry settled beside Sirius in the front seat. Behind them, Ron and Draco sat together, and, much to everyone's surprise, Creature squeezed in next to Draco. But the house elf no longer looked as if he were basking in honorable company. Instead, he wore an expression equal parts pride and disappointment. Pride in his own cleverness, disappointment in his former master's pure-blood grandnephew, and his new young master, who were proving to be woeful teachers. Miss Sissy will be heartbroken when she hears this, Creature muttered darkly. Harry tuned out the whispers in the back seat. Even the revelation that Lord Voldemort had once been a teenager faded beside his brighter emotions. Relief that Dobby was truly free, and the elation of leaving the Dursleys behind. Sirius rolled down the window. A warm breeze rushed past, and Harry closed his eyes, drinking in the wind and the knowledge that, at last, he was home. Sirius looked at Harry, his eyes shining as though he'd been swept back to the days when he and James tore through the Muggle streets on their motorcycles. This is incredible, he said. Harry grinned, letting the warm wind whip through his hair as the rooftops of Privet Drive shrank beneath them. Woohoo! See you all next summer. He leaned back in his seat, still smiling. Ron, open Hedwig's cage, and look at Dobby. He hasn't flown in ages. No wonder he's put on so much weight. Draco handed the owl's cage to Ron, and in an instant, Hedwig slipped out of the open window, her snowy wings carrying her beside the car like a silent guardian. Sirius shot Creature a pointed look. Quiet now, Creature. The house elf snapped to attention, his muttering coming to an abrupt halt. A welcome calm settled over the group. Thank you, Ron sighed, poking his head out of the window to drink in the fresh air. My ears were about to go numb from all that talking. Draco scowled at the corner where Creature crouched. Try sitting next to him. I swear every single whisper he makes is aimed at me. Ron chuckled as he sank back into his seat. Honestly, between Creature's endless commentary and Dobby's newfound chubbiness, I've learned exactly why having a house elf of your own might not be such a brilliant idea after all. They're the only exceptions, Draco said, his tone perfectly measured. Harry glanced at him, concern in his eyes. Draco, are you sure your father won't be furious with you? Ron, hovering nearby, jumped in with his own worry. Yeah, mate. Will this change your invite to the manor? You know, before you head off to Sirius's." Harry and Draco exchanged a knowing look. Ron's sudden anxieties were as familiar to them as Hogwarts itself. Ron just hadn't realized he'd been talking out loud. Draco ignored Ron and addressed Harry directly. "You know my family, pure blood through and through. We have more than one house elf at Malfoy Manor, but all it takes is my word. I tell Father that Harry Potter would never allow Dobby to stay in servitude, and I can grant Dobby his freedom." He flashed Harry a sly grin. "In Father's eyes, my friendship with you is worth far more than keeping a single house elf." Ron's eyes lit up. "I knew you'd worked it all out already. As a Weasley, I know how Malfoys operate. They never take a loss." Harry nodded, then hesitated. "But what about the other elves? Won't they suffer for Dobby's sake?" Draco's smile softened. Even though Harry's face was turned away, Draco could tell he was worried. "They're not related to Dobby," he explained. "Father won't punish them. They'll remain exactly where they are. Only Dobby will go free." Sirius pinched the bridge of his nose. "I said, won't this article make Lucius completely misunderstand the nature of your friendship?" Draco's face paled, as if he'd just caught a whiff of something foul. "Fry, endship? What?" He glared at Sirius. "What's unclear? Didn't we make ourselves perfectly explicit before?" Harry felt the room grow darker. "Bloody Rita Skeeter," Ron exploded. "She can't even remember my name." Draco lifted an eyebrow. "And if she does remember it, if Lucius finally learns you're Ron Weasley?" He let the idea hang in the air. "Splendid, really. At last half the wizarding world will know Draco Malfoy's name. Tell me, Draco, who do you think I am?" Ron's ears burned crimson. "About as shameless as Rita Skeeter?" he retorted. Harry couldn't help but smile. "Exactly." The others burst into laughter, all except Ron, still sniffling indignantly, and Creature, who simply blinked in puzzled contentment. In that moment, poor Ron Weasley found himself the only one nursing wounded pride. Chapter 252, Sirius. Suddenly left. Harry had always thought the Burrow was the most wonderful place in the world. Growing up under Aunt Petunia's strict, colorless regime, he'd never learned to appreciate polished floors or perfectly aligned furniture. But the Weasley home, with its haphazard turrets, mismatched rooms, and riot of warm colors, had won his heart the very first time he saw it. "That's the main road up ahead," Ron called, peering through the windshield. "We ought to reach Ottery St. Catchpole in about 10 minutes. If we hurry, we won't miss dinner." Sirius Black eased the car lower, and the patchwork of rolling fields and woodlands slipped into view below them. Scattered here and there were the humble, ivy-clad cottages of the villagers, and the occasional isolated wizarding household. "Welcome to Ottery St. Catchpole," Ron said, voice bright with anticipation. "The Burrow's just outside the village proper. A few magical families live nearby, but mostly we're tucked away in the countryside." Harry scanned the horizon until he spotted a most improbable silhouette, a tall, leaning structure of dark timber and brick, its floors stacked at wild angles, a faintly glowing silver moon hovering inexplicably above the roof. "Is that the Burrow?" he asked, pointing. Ron grinned. "You got it. No muggle would ever build or tolerate a place like that. But to us, it's home." As the car glided closer, Harry felt that familiar rush of warmth and belonging. Whatever chaos awaited inside, he knew he was exactly where he belonged. "Look, that's Xenophilius Lovegood's house, the editor of the Quibbler. He's a bit eccentric, and his daughter's said to be just as mad." Ron scowled at the round, turreted building drifting below them. "How can that be our destination? Who else would live in something like that besides the Lovegoods? It looks like a giant wheelbarrow." Draco leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the odd construction. "A wheelbarrow? Ron, I'm pretty sure that isn't a cart." "I meant the rook in chess," Ron snapped. "A castle to you." Harry let out a small laugh and pointed ahead, where another house rose up at a crazy angle. "And that would be your home?" From above, it looked as though someone had piled stone pigsties one on top of another, adding rooms willy-nilly until the whole thing teetered 4 stories high. The red-tiled roof sprouted 4 or 5 crooked chimneys, and a hand-painted wooden sign swung on a diagonal, "The Burrow." By the front door, a pair of scuffed leather boots and a rusty cauldron lay discarded. In the yard, plump brown hens pecked industriously at the earth. Harry's heart lifted when he saw the sign. "The Burrow," he murmured. Of course, this was exactly where Ron Weasley lived. Harry liked the place well enough, but he knew Ron probably wouldn't. So? Not so great? Ron squirmed in his seat as if it were lined with nails. Before Harry could answer, the car shuddered and set down with a soft thump. They'd arrived beside a run-down garage set in an overgrown yard. Harry turned, giving Ron an encouraging smile. No, I really do like it. Ron stared at the peeling paint and sagging roof, unconvinced. Footsteps scuffed across the gravel, accompanied by heavy breathing. A lanky man emerged into view, slightly bald on top, but a mop of fiery red hair stood out around his ears like a bristling fence. His faded green robes billowed as though caught in a breeze. Harry had never met him before, but he knew instantly it was Ron's father. "Does she fly all right? You two serious?" Mr. Weasley panted, leaning against the garage doorframe as he caught his breath. "Very good, Arthur." Sirius Black gave a satisfied nod and then faced Harry. "I'll be away for a few days. I'll come back to fetch you then." He turned to Mr. Weasley. "Arthur, look after them, and tell Molly she doesn't need to cook for me." With a faint crackle, Sirius disappeared. "Come in, children. And Harry." Arthur Weasley bustled forward, his eyes twinkling. "I didn't get a proper greeting last time. You must excuse me. I'm delighted to see you again. Ron has told me so many stories about you." He lowered his voice. "Now, what happened while Sirius was off collecting you? As I understood it, you three were meant to go straight to his house after dinner." "That was the plan," Harry confirmed. "Molly nearly persuaded you to stay with us for a few days," Mr. Weasley went on, "but Sirius was adamant you move on." Harry frowned. I wonder what made him change his mind. And why did Creature stay behind? "Ah, hello, Creature," Arthur said, addressing the house elf. Creature's pale, faded face stared back at them in stony silence. Ron rolled his eyes. "Dad, we've just climbed out of the flying Ford Anglia, and the first thing you ask is, how did the car fly?" "Ronald," Mr. Weasley snapped, wagging a finger. "A little courtesy, please. We haven't even properly welcomed Harry yet." Draco leaned forward, his pale eyes dancing with mischief. "Your grand cause, Mr. Weasley," he drawled, as if daring the older wizard to defend it. He glanced at Arthur Weasley, clearly hoping for some encouragement. Mr. Weasley pressed his fingertips to his temples. He felt his thinning hair prickle with a headache already forming. He was sure Draco was mocking him. He'd caught that same cold sneer on the Malfoy boy's face as on his father's. Still, Draco was a child, and it wouldn't do to lose his temper. Before Arthur could reply, Harry tapped his fork against his plate. "I actually think Sirius should be the one to return to Hogwarts. It's about the Defense Against the Dark Arts post." Silence fell around the kitchen table. Mrs. Weasley paused with the kettle in mid-lift, and Ron and Ginny exchanged curious glances. Arthur looked from Harry to Draco. "I thought Sirius gave up on that idea ages ago." "He did, or so we thought," Harry said. "He's still determined. Last year he pushed hard to get the job himself, or at least to secure it for Remus Lupin." Draco's brow shot up. "Lupin?" Ron rolled his eyes. "Honestly, Dad, Professor Lupin, you've met him before." "I beg your pardon?" Arthur said, genuinely puzzled. Harry grinned. "He's one of Dad's old friends. We were in Professor McGonagall's office last term talking about him. Your memory needs some work." Mrs. Weasley set the kettle down with a soft clank and let out a relieved chuckle. Even Draco's lips twitched into a reluctant smile. The chatter around the table picked up again. Plates clinked, spoons tapped, and for a moment, the only question that mattered was whether Hogwarts would see Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, or someone entirely unexpected stepping into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom next term. "Well, Harry, you're right," Mr. Weasley said, leaning forward in his chair. "Sirius saw it too. That Defense Against the Dark Arts post is cursed." Harry glanced up. Mr. Weasley continued. "He even proposed splitting the school year with Remus. Sirius would take the first term, Lupin the second. But Dumbledore refused, insisting he had someone better in mind. I remember Lucius Malfoy asked about it as well. Draco, surely you've heard something?" Draco Malfoy shook his head. "No idea." Harry exchanged a look with Ron. It was obvious now why Sirius and Remus had failed to secure the position. No matter how devoted they were to Dumbledore, they couldn't compete with the mysterious candidate the headmaster preferred. Defense Against the Dark Arts was one of the most sought-after jobs in the school. Dumbledore wouldn't risk it on friends, however capable, if he had someone he trusted even more. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mr. Weasley sat up straighter, turning toward the door. "Arthur, have you forgotten our Weasley clock at home?" he muttered, half to himself. "I'm not blind," came Mrs. Weasley's calm voice from the corridor. "I can see perfectly well that both your hand and Ron's point straight to home." Mr. Weasley blinked in surprise as his wife stepped into the room. She looked as kindly as ever, but no imagination could have prepared him for the certainty in her eyes. Not the Mrs. Weasley he was used to at all. Mrs. Weasley, normally such a plump, gentle soul, now reminded Harry of a snarling tiger, all sharp teeth and fiery eyes. "So Sirius has been sneaking around getting your wreck of a car legal again while he sorted out his motorcycle paperwork?" she demanded, her tone icy. "That hardly excuses loitering here for hours on end." She lowered her voice to a thunderous rumble. "Besides, dinner's on the table, and you'd best be there before it gets cold." Chapter 253. At the Weasley house, Harry and Draco had barely stepped through the front gate when Mrs. Weasley came bustling out of the cottage, her rosy cheeks and bright eyes the picture of hospitality. Behind her, Mr. Weasley lingered on the porch, shifting anxiously from one foot to the other. "Sirius left in a hurry," Arthur explained in an oddly cheerful tone, as if he were announcing a delightful surprise rather than abandoning his godson's guardianship. "He said he'd be gone a few days and left the children in our care." Harry exchanged a puzzled glance with Draco. "That's why you were late collecting us." Molly's expression melted into a warm, almost maternal smile as she reached out to touch Harry's shoulders. "Harry, dear, look at you. You're positively skin and bones." She stepped back, hands on hips, surveying him as though he'd returned from the front lines of a long campaign. "You must be starving. Come inside. Dinner's been waiting for ages." Mr. Weasley cleared his throat. "Yes, well." Molly shot him a sharp look. She'd perfected that glance over 20 years of marriage. It said, quite plainly, "Don't argue," and Harry suspected she knew exactly what Sirius's abrupt departure really meant. But with guests present, she let the matter lie. As they strolled across the lawn, Percy emerged onto the steps, chest puffed out in his customary official manner. He snapped a crisp salute. "Hello, Harry." "Hello, Draco," he said. "Hello, Percy," Harry and Draco chorused. Molly sped up her pace, hurrying them toward the kitchen door. "Hurry, dears, before it all gets cold," she called over her shoulder, already weaving through the tidy flower beds as if dancing to some joyful tune. Inside, the Weasley household buzzed with its usual chaos, but tonight the commotion felt more like the warm, welcoming hum of home than anything else. Harry sat down for dinner, his prefect's badge gleaming on the knitted vest he wore over his shirt. "Our brother hasn't gone a day without it since he got it," someone remarked, and another added, "Seriously, he never takes it off." Before Harry could reply, Fred and George burst in. "Hello, Harry, and Malfoy's little pet," they chimed in unison. Harry barely registered their taunts. His stomach was growling so loudly it threatened to drown them out. He looked around the tiny, bustling kitchen. At its center stood a well-worn wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. On the far wall, a curious clock, complete with only one hand and no numbers, bore reminders scrawled in looping letters. "Make tea. Feed the chickens. You're going to be late." Above the fireplace mantel sat 3 dog-eared cookbooks. "Enchanting Your Cheese," "The Magic of Baking Bread," "Conjuring a Feast." An old radio perched beside the sink, its brass dials gleaming under the warm light. Harry stared in wonder. Was this truly a wizard's home? He'd never seen anything like it. All around him, the dinner spread waited. A steaming pot of chicken, a golden ham pie, and a covered dish of boiled potatoes, releasing a comforting hiss whenever someone lifted the lid. A bowl of fresh salad stood by, awaiting its dressing. Harry's attention drifted back to the food. He was starving. "Mom," Fred called out, "there are 10 of us tonight, counting that crazy elf." George chimed in, "Can the kitchen even hold us all? We vote to eat outside in the yard." Harry opened his mouth to answer, but first he grabbed a steaming forkful of potatoes, and finally let his appetite take over. Mrs. Weasley jabbed her wand into the salad bowl and began to stir vigorously. "If you'd eaten a proper lunch instead of spending all morning scheming about explosions, you'd remember I told you that ages ago." With a loud whir, cream sauce sprayed from the wand's tip, showering lettuce leaves in a creamy arc. Fred and George ducked instinctively, snickering as they backed away. Just then, a small red-haired girl in a blue robe dashed into the kitchen, let out a squeal, and darted back out before anyone could stop her. Ron leaned close to Harry and whispered, that was Ginny, my sister. She's been talking about you all summer." Draco Malfoy's pale eyebrows shot up. "Your sister likes Potter?" he said, a hint of envy in his voice. Since Harry's arrival, Draco had noticed how every head in the room turned toward him, offering only polite civility in Draco's direction. Fred seized the opportunity. "Jealous much, Malfoy?" he teased. "Someone's got the hots for Potter." Before the bickering could escalate, Percy stepped forward and, quite against his usual weekday habits, helped move the dining table out into the garden. Fred rolled his eyes. "Oh, come off it. Percy isn't doing this for us. He just wants everyone to stare at that shiny medal on his chest." Sure enough, Percy stood a little straighter, chest thrust forward, as though emblazoned honors were the only thing worth showing off. "Hey, you three," Fred called over his shoulder to Ron, Harry, and Draco. "Percy's done setting the table. The garden's all ours." They followed Percy outside, settling into chairs around the spread of roast chicken, buttered potatoes, and steaming vegetables. Mrs. Weasley hurried to pour tea. Ginny, brimming with excitement, peeked around the open kitchen door, her blue robes fluttering in the breeze as she watched Harry with wide, eager eyes. Harry smiled at the family's warmth, and even at Draco, who found himself uncomfortably aware of how much some people clearly preferred Harry's company that day. As Mrs. Weasley placed the last dish on the table, the summer sun filtered through the trees, and for a moment everything felt perfectly ordinary and perfectly wonderful. Mrs. Weasley bustled out of the kitchen. "Ron, would you fetch the knives and forks? Fred, George, could you carry these plates outside? Harry, Draco, go on ahead and wait for dinner in the garden." She paused at the door and glanced back over her shoulder. "I'd better fry up some more sausages. Look at you, Harry, you're as thin as a rake." With a nod, Harry and Draco slipped through the back door into the garden. A pale green tablecloth was spread neatly on the grass, and Percy sat at one end, chest held proudly high. When Ron handed him a knife and fork, Percy's prefect badge caught the afternoon sunlight and gleamed. Ginny perched on the opposite side, her fiery hair glowing brighter with anticipation. Harry leaned back against the lintel and called, "Creature, come on out. You're welcome to eat with us." From the shadows of the doorway, Creature peered at the scene, arms folded. His lips curled in a disdainful sneer that seemed entirely out of place in the warm bustle of the Weasley household. "House elf does not stoop to dine with guests of the family," he muttered loudly enough for Harry to hear. Harry shifted uncomfortably. Creature, it really is all right if you join us." Creature sniffed. "If Harry Potter insists, old Creature will pretend not to have heard," he huffed, and with a stiff nod, he turned and receded into the kitchen, leaving Harry blinking after him. Dinner arrived before long, and 2 tables groaned under the weight of Mrs. Weasley's home-cooked feast. Under a deep blue night sky, the 7 Weasleys sat alongside Harry and Draco, sharing chicken, ham pie, boiled potatoes, and crisp salad. After an afternoon spent exploring and taking in so many new experiences, Harry felt as though he'd found paradise. He tucked into his food with such enthusiasm that he barely paused to speak. At the far end of the table, Mrs. Weasley fretted over every detail of the day's adventures. She accidentally heaped a few extra sausages onto Harry's plate, shot occasional glares at Mr. Weasley, and muttered, "Flying across half the country in an untested car, honestly." Mr. Weasley shook his head. "I still can't believe it." "If it weren't for Creature, I'd never have felt safe," Mrs. Weasley added in a low growl. Creature, lurking at her side, sniffed disdainfully. "Do you doubt my skills?" Mr. Weasley said, though his attention soon wandered as the family banter shifted from one topic to the next, the warm chatter and clinking cutlery filling the night air with contented noise. Ginny's cheeks burned scarlet as the porcelain plate clattered to the floor for the 2nd time that evening. She knelt beneath the table to retrieve it, emerging moments later with her hair slightly mussed and her eyes cast downward. "Ginny, would you like to sit by your father?" Mr. Weasley asked cheerfully, gesturing to the chair beside him. All evening, Ginny had occupied the golden seat directly across from Harry, but now her father seemed determined to shift her. "No, thank you," Ginny murmured, barely audible. Harry pretended not to notice her hasty refusal, though Draco Malfoy, seated next to him, suppressed a mischievous chuckle that only Harry could hear. When the meal finally drew to a close, Harry rubbed his very full stomach. Mrs. Weasley had refilled his plate no fewer than 4 times, and rose with exaggeratedly heavy steps. Alongside Ron and Draco, he wound his way down a narrow corridor before tackling a rickety, twisting staircase. 2 flights up, they reached a faded wooden door whose paint peeled in curling strips. A small, hand-painted sign declared simply, "Ron's Room." Harry pushed it open. Inside, the ceiling slanted sharply, forcing him to duck as he stepped in. Ron looked nervously between his 2 guests. "Well," he said, trying to sound confident, "this is where the 3 of us will be sleeping." Chapter 254. Kate at Smith Castle. Encounters between people are filled with a kind of magic, and every crime carries its own mystery. I consider myself lucky to have met you. Today's case began with a sudden, violent brawl in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. Only one person has unraveled the whole truth, the renowned detective Ryan. He may look like a child, but his intellect far surpasses that of any ordinary wizard. Fate works in strange ways. Ryan murmured as a haunting melody from the far east drifted through the halls of Smith Castle. Kate looked around in surprise, her round eyes sparkling. "Ryan, what is this song? And what was that narration just now?" Ryan was stretched out on the opposite end of the grand sofa, clearly at ease. His lips curved into a gentle smile. "It's just right for the moment." Without warning, Kate kicked off her dainty white slippers and propped her foot against Ryan's belly. He chuckled softly and reached out, his finger tracing the arch of her foot. In that instant, a sliver of silver light coalesced into a mysterious rune that shot through the air and settled on Kate's right hand, glowing softly. "Ow! Hey!" Kate yelped, pulling her hand back. She stared down at the rune, her brow furrowed. "What on earth are you doing, Ryan?" Ryan's eyes twinkled. "Just a little enchantment to keep things interesting." Kate rolled her eyes, but couldn't help the small smile tugging at her lips. Whatever mysteries lay ahead, she sensed that with Ryan by her side, nothing would remain hidden for long. "Connection," Ryan explained, "is the word I coined for when you truly focus your attention." He waved a hand as he spoke. "And hasn't our star reporter, Kate, always wanted to find out who'll be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts next semester? Now you can," he added with a confident smile. Kate hesitated only a moment before meeting his gaze. She trusted Ryan. Almost immediately, her eyes shimmered silver, mirroring his own. The world around her vanished, and in its place stood a familiar room, Professor Dumbledore's office. Yet nothing looked right. Gleaming fragments of silverware lay scattered across the floor, each piece ripped from its original shape. The great armchair, once a symbol of calm authority, now bore deep gouges from knives and axes. The walls were marred by scratches, and books lay torn and twisted on the shelves. Clearly, a brutal battle had taken place here. Kate's breath caught in her throat. She knew she wasn't physically present, but the scene felt all too real. Who would dare attack Dumbledore's private sanctum, the sanctuary of the greatest white wizard? Could the Quibbler's wild rumors be true after all? Could countless house elves, trained as assassins, really be lurking behind Fudge's bumbling exterior? She tried to turn her head, hoping to see more of the devastation, to understand what had happened. Then she remembered. She was viewing the scene through Ryan's magic. She was locked into his perspective, unable to look away or shift her vantage point. A chill ran down her spine. Even for a seasoned reporter, this was beyond any story she'd ever pursued. And yet, here she was, trapped inside Ryan's vision, with no idea how to escape or what horrors she might uncover next. Kate's eyes narrowed as the portrait at last cleared, revealing 2 figures. One was, of course, Professor Dumbledore, his half-moon spectacles slipping down his aquiline nose, his serene gaze sweeping over the ruined cabinet as if it belonged to someone else. But the other figure sent a jolt through her. Sirius Black, celebrated hero of the British wizarding community. Yet it wasn't Sirius's face that shocked Kate as much as his words. "Dumbledore," he demanded, wand already leveled at the headmaster, "why on earth are you arranging for Voldemort to be our next professor?" Dumbledore steepled his long fingers, his expression as unruffled as ever. "If I recall correctly, Sirius, Remus, and I both applied for the position." Sirius's smile was tight, edged with tension. First of all, you should address him by his proper name, Tom Riddle. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly. I confess, I expected we'd end up with someone entirely devoted to Voldemort's cause, someone loyal to you-know-who. Fawkes, the Phoenix, circled above them in silent, fiery arcs, his soft cry echoing through the shattered hall. I never imagined the choice would be you, Sirius said, fury and disbelief warring in his voice. This is supposed to be a school, not a hunting ground. Dumbledore's pale eyes twinkled as a faint, ironic smile curved his lips. That's not like you, Sirius. That's not who you are, Dumbledore said, his tone firm as he brushed back his long white beard. He cleared his throat before continuing. You're only acting this way because of Harry. Sirius's shoulders tensed. So you're hiring Tom as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor? Dumbledore inclined his head. He's made a binding agreement with me. Hogwarts has lacked a steady instructor in that post for far too long. I can assure you he'll be more than capable. At that, Sirius relaxed, exhaling the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Then why turn down Lupin and me? You could have let Tom take over next semester and given us first dibs. The headmaster gave a gentle, rueful smile. To tell the truth, I want to spend more time with Harry, and I'd rather not add another worry to my list, especially not Snotlout. Sirius's brow furrowed. Dumbledore's pale blue eyes met his, soft but unyielding. We all know how much you trust Severus, how deeply that trust wounds you, even angers you, yet it remains steadfast. He paused, leaning back in his chair. My question, Sirius, is this. Are you truly ready to be a teacher, to step out of hiding and accept the role you once shunned? A sad smile curved Sirius's lips. No, I'm not ready. I can't bear being treated like some hero. Dumbledore's expression softened. Then don't. Do only what you must. Sirius turned his gaze to the high windows overlooking the grounds. All I want is more time with Harry. In the quiet of the headmaster's office, Sirius Black leaned forward. As for the rest, there's Remus Lupin. Dumbledore regarded him thoughtfully. Lupin is trustworthy, and he needs a post close to Hogwarts. Sirius nodded. You know how much Hogwarts means to him, the one place where he's never faced prejudice. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. Is your suggestion motivated by guilt? Sirius gave a wry shrug. Because you once doubted him. A gentle smile touched Dumbledore's lips. Sirius, you always see right through me. Very well. I've already offered a position to another small friend today, Dobby. I can't play favorites. Let Remus serve as assistant in the Defense Against the Dark Arts. Sirius frowned. That odd little elf? Will Tom Riddle object to Lupin being his assistant? Dumbledore leaned back, steepling his fingers. I have other posts in mind for Remus if it becomes a problem. I could always withdraw the offer. No, Sirius said firmly. Tom needs a capable assistant, especially with all those makeup lessons he has to teach. He'll adapt. Their conversation faded, and the scene cut abruptly to Kate, her eyes blazing. Ryan, you. She jabbed her small fist into his chest. What were you thinking? Chapter Hex. Ryan leaned back, a teasing glint in his eye. So I've answered all your questions, and yet you're still not satisfied. He understood why Kate was upset. With Penello away traveling with her parents, Kate had no one to back her up, which meant Ryan's light-hearted teasing was all the more effective. I want to know, what lessons Voldemort still needs to learn? Kate replied slowly, enunciating each word. In the years she'd known Ryan, she'd put Voldemort and his followers firmly behind her, so firmly that she no longer hesitated to call him by name. Clearing his throat in mock seriousness, Ryan said, All right, Kate Sensen. Let's start with something simple. He tapped his chin, adopting an imaginary professor's air. What does Voldemort hate the most? Kate frowned, caught off guard for a moment. Then realization dawned. Muggles? Close. Muggle studies, Ryan corrected, a triumphant smile tugging at his lips. She groaned. I should have known that. Bingo, Ryan declared. See, even the Dark Lord can learn something new. Meanwhile, at the burrow just outside Ottery St. Catchpole, Harry Potter leaned against the kitchen doorway, his gaze fixed on the flickering green flames of the flue. He had no idea what his godfather was up to at Hogwarts, but what he really needed was advice on balancing his friendships with Draco Malfoy and Ron Weasley. The fireplace roared to life, and Sirius Black's voice emerged from the swirling embers. Harry, you should come join me in the tent. Harry raised an eyebrow. You and Ron have always shared a dorm at Hogwarts, he reminded him, glancing around so no one would overhear. Why do I need to go to your tent? Sirius chuckled. Just trust me on this one. Now hurry. With a resigned nod, Harry stepped forward. Flew. Black. In an instant, emerald sparks engulfed him, and he vanished from the burrow, leaving only the faint smell of cinnamon in his wake. Now that we finally have this chance, you should come with me, Draco declared, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd and sending onlookers' cheeks flushing and pulses racing. Chapter 255, Harry's Biggest Regret. 10 minutes ago, Harry had desperately wished he could turn back time and stop himself from following Ron up to his dormitory. He might even have been willing to share a bed with Percy instead. Anything to avoid this. Ron's room felt like a gaudy shrine to wizardry, every surface bathed in a blaring orange-yellow. The walls, the ceiling, even the bedspread gleamed as if they'd been dipped in pumpkin juice. Harry had gotten used to bold decor. Ron had decorated his Ravenclaw dorm bed in nearly the same style, but this was a new level of brightness. The real source of the color, of course, was the dozens of Chudley artillery posters plastered everywhere. Each one featured the same 7 witches and wizards in vivid orange robes, broomsticks poised for flight, faces alight with joy. Harry wondered if Ron's team loyalty stretched so far that he'd plaster his entire room with them. What else could explain the uniformity? He moved toward Ron's desk, half hoping to spot something reminiscent of Ravenclaw. Blueprints, feathered quills, a single blue pen even, but found only a haphazard stack of magic textbooks buried under comic books. No Ravenclaw blue anywhere, just this relentless orange. Harry sighed. He really should have stayed out of this room all along. Doraemon sat perched on the top shelf, its bright blue cover untouched by dust. Just below it lay a weary copy of The Adventures of Martin Miggs, the Mad Muggle, so thickly coated in grime it was obvious nobody had read it in ages. On the windowsill, Ron's wand balanced across a large fish tank brimming with frog spawn. His plump gray rat, Scabbers, lay curled beside it, snoring softly. Ron let out a relieved chuckle, and Harry returned a warm, encouraging smile. Not bad, Ron admitted. From the corner came Draco's cool drawl. You two can help me. Harry and Ron exchanged exasperated looks. What's he on about now? Ron muttered. The room was bathed in an amber glow that highlighted a deep green dragonhide bag lying open on the floor. Draco crouched over it, wrestling out metal poles and a bundle of canvas. An unassembled tent lay at his feet. Come on, Ron, Draco complained, pulling a stiff stake from the bag. I'm not sleeping in your bed. He paused to tug at a particularly stubborn pole. Actually, he added with an exaggerated sigh, I'd rather not share a bed with anyone. Harry stepped forward to inspect the kit. Draco planted a pole into the floorboards with a loud click. Besides, he said, glancing between them, you both know I've never pitched a tent before. The Dursleys never took me anywhere over the holidays. They just left me with Mrs. Fig. Harry and Ron exchanged a sympathetic look. As Draco fumbled with the last of the tent ropes, they moved in to help, determined that, no matter how odd it seemed, the 3 of them would have a roof overhead tonight. Harry couldn't help but think of Filch again. Somehow the caretaker now seemed like a female counterpart to Mrs. Fig. According to Ryan's joking spin on Chinese naming conventions, maybe they were distant relatives, both surnamed Fay, and equally fond of cats. It wasn't entirely impossible. Stop worrying and just point your wand at it, Draco said, resting with a pile of metal poles. Ron strode over to flick an unlocking jinx, and within seconds, Draco announced the frame free of its snarled joints. He pulled out his wand, aimed at the heap of parts, and muttered the enchantment. Instantly, the pieces snapped together with a satisfying click, revealing a simple blue tent in the corner of Ron's room. There, Draco said, brushing dust off his hands. You can sleep in here. It's a bit small and the ground's rough, but it'll do. I've slept in tents before, Draco added with a shrug, as if to prove it. Harry winced. Why not just bunk with Ron? He asked, eyebrows raised. Draco said nothing, just gave Harry and Ron a confident look that dared them to question him. Then, on all fours, he wriggled into the tent. Harry exchanged a glance with Ron, bent down and followed. He stepped inside and froze. What had looked like a cramped 2-person tent on the outside was suddenly a luxurious 3-bedroom apartment on the inside. Polished wooden floors stretched beneath their feet. Off to one side gleamed a pristine bathroom, complete with brass fixtures. Beyond that lay a generous game room, stacked with wizarding board games and a set of chairs. Harry's jaw hung open. How? Expansion charm, Ron whispered, eyes dancing. Hagrid taught me that one. Draco smirked, settling onto a plush armchair. Told you it'd be worth it. Harry and Ron burst into laughter, the cramped world they'd left behind reduced to nothing more than a memory, or, at least, a conveniently conjured illusion. Harry stepped into Draco's guest chamber and found it lavish to the point of absurdity, exactly what he'd expected from the heir of the Malfoy fortune. Every piece of furniture, from the plush, velvet-upholstered sofa to the intricately carved bedposts, was adorned with flourishes that served no purpose but decoration. Draco Malfoy lounged on a chaise longue, legs crossed, an amused smirk on his face. "What is this, camping?" he drawled. "Is it necessary to go this over the top?" Ron, who had trailed in behind Harry, froze for a heartbeat before indignation took over. "Don't tell me the burrow isn't grand enough for you," he shot back. Draco rolled his eyes. "Honestly, Ron, I had no idea we were crashing at your place." "I didn't even know we were staying here," Ron growled. "Weren't we heading to Sirius's?" Draco added, sounding genuinely puzzled. Ron blinked, his anger deflating. "Right." With that settled, the three of them left their tents in the hallway and began debating Harry's sleeping arrangements. Then Draco decided to stir the pot. Calling down the corridor in a loud, mocking tone, he said, "Ginny, good news. Harry's your new roommate tonight." In an instant, a streak of scarlet hair and blue pajamas flashed by, and the door slammed so hard the walls shook. "Ginny, no, wait." Ron sputtered, but she was already gone. He whirled on Draco, eyes blazing. You rotten snake. I spent nearly a month convincing her there's nothing romantic between Harry and me." His cheeks burned as he glared, and Draco merely raised an eyebrow, offering a slim, coy shrug. Harry yanked the door open and sprinted down the corridor, Draco close behind him. They had to find Ginny and explain everything before she worried herself sick. Rounding the corner too sharply, they nearly ran into two familiar figures. Fred and George Weasley, their matching red hair blazing like warning beacons. The twins grinned at once. "So," Fred drawled, "the Malfoy brat and our Harry? What's the story there? Jealousy? A duel for Harry's affections?" George chimed in. "Yeah, why didn't you call us sooner? We love a good drama." They narrowed their eyes at Draco, made one thorough sweep of him, and then, satisfied there was no one else to tease, melted away into the bustling hallway as if they'd never been there. Harry barely had time to process the twins' parting laughter before Percy Weasley strode up, prefect badge gleaming on his chest. He paused in front of Harry and Draco, chin tilted in that self-important way of his, took a long sniff, and shot them a severe look. Without a word, he marched off, straightening his robes as though he were the very embodiment of authority. "Percy," Harry muttered under his breath. Draco, catching sight of the badge, raised an eyebrow. "I think his righteous act is just that, an act." Harry blinked. "What makes you say that?" Draco gestured toward Percy's chest. "Notice how he kept jabbing at his badge? He isn't proud. He's fishing for praise." Harry's shoulders slumped. "You're right. He's been flaunting that medal ever since he became prefect, and we never even congratulated him." Draco gave a small nod. "That'll do it. Let's go find him and Ginny before he hatches a whole new way to prove he's superior." Together, they turned on their heels and set off down the corridor, determined to make things right. Ron stormed into the common room, eyes blazing with exasperation. "Why on earth are you two still here flirting?" Harry lifted an eyebrow. "Honestly, if I weren't one of the people involved, I'd think someone was making this up." Draco leaned back against the armchair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "So you finally admit Rita Skeeter wasn't fabricating our story?" Harry shrugged. "She just wrote down exactly what she saw." Ron sank against the doorframe, looking utterly dejected. Draco rolled his eyes and muttered, "Are you out of your mind?" But even he knew how much Ron despised Rita's sensational articles, no matter how accurate they proved to be. Harry said nothing, but he agreed. Ron ran a hand through his hair. "The worst part? Everyone overheard us. Ginny, Fred, George, even Percy." He crossed the room and collapsed onto the nearest sofa. "By the time I got home, Mum and Dad had already read the article. I've never seen them look at me like that before." Harry glanced across at his friend. Even if the Chudley Cannons were to win the Quidditch Cup tomorrow, he knew it wouldn't bring the slightest smile back to Ron's face. Chapter 256, A Disagreement About Goblins. That first night at the Burrow had ended in an awkward silence. Ron had fallen strangely quiet, and even Draco, who usually delighted in teasing him, kept his mouth shut. Ron had been determined to claim the spot next to Harry. After all, the more you lose something, the more you value it. But when Harry simply shrugged and said, "The tent's big enough for all three of us," Ron's resolve collapsed. The silence between them grew so thick Ron could almost touch it. He let out a low, disgruntled hum as the ghouls wailing in the rafters above joined in mockery, rattling the pipes overhead. With a final sigh, the trio moved over to Draco's bedroll. Ron pitched it as a small consolation. "Look, I'm me. Can't I have this?" But no one really doubted he felt defeated. Morning arrived all too quickly. Life at the Burrow was nothing like at the Dursleys'. Where the Dursleys demanded order and plainness, the Weasleys embraced chaos and wonder. Over breakfast, Harry's eyes jumped to the mirror perched on the kitchen mantel. When he leaned in, it crackled like fireworks and barked out, "Tuck your shirt in, you're a disgrace," so loud it made Mrs. Weasley jump. And from upstairs, Fred and George's room periodically echoed with tiny explosions as their latest inventions fizzed and popped in the background. It felt good, strange and unpredictable, but good, to be among friends who might scold you one minute and surprise you the next. At least here, Harry thought, even the house had a sense of humor. Harry felt that familiar pang of regret wash over him. Why had he chosen to stay with the Weasleys? It wasn't the charming old house or the endless surprises that thrilled him most. It was the simple fact that everyone here genuinely liked him. At Hogwarts, even among friends, he'd never felt quite so wholeheartedly accepted. In the Ravenclaw dormitory, he was always the odd one out. With the Dursleys, he'd been nothing more than a burden. Here, he was part of a family, and it felt spectacularly different. He sighed as Mrs. Weasley settled into her favorite armchair, a pile of Harry's socks in her lap. She'd taken to darning them herself, insisting he thank her at least 4 times every meal. It was her gentle way of making him feel cared for, and Harry, no matter how embarrassed, couldn't help but be touched by the kindness in her hands. Yet beneath the warmth lay an unspoken tension ever since Draco's cruel words the night before. Mrs. Weasley didn't trust Harry and Draco to talk things out alone, so she enlisted Fred and George to keep them in check. "Fred, George, come with Harry and Draco," she said, her knitting needles flashing like tiny swords. "Mum, we've got chores to do," George protested, and Fred added, "Yeah, we can't just drop everything." Mrs. Weasley fixed them with a stern look. "Then you'll do them without magic, and if you don't want your wands confiscated, you'll hand them over now." The twins cast each other glum looks, but didn't argue further. Rowling's old motto, "When Mum says no wand, that's no wand," was law in this house. And Harry, despite everything, felt a little safer, knowing he wasn't facing his troubles alone. Mr. Weasley always insists that Harry sit beside him at mealtimes, and he never misses an opportunity to pepper him with questions about Muggle life, how electrical plugs work, what happens at a post office, and, under Mrs. Weasley's ever-watchful glare, whether Harry has a girlfriend. Harry doesn't mind in the least. It's a rare pleasure to chat with someone as warm-hearted and enthusiastic as Mr. Weasley. Nor does he mind the constant laughter and chaos Fred and George weave around the table. Even when Ron can't resist teasing his best friend, both Harry and Draco find themselves smiling at the twins' endless mischief. Yet for all the mirth and good cheer at the Burrow, Harry can't shake a small but growing unease. Ginny, the littlest Weasley, once so shy and awkward around him, no longer blushes or stammers when their eyes meet. Instead, Harry often catches a fall, ash of her bright red hair, out of the corner of his eye, only for her to slip away the moment he tries to look in her direction. Her talent for vanishing is almost as uncanny as Ryan's, and it leaves Harry feeling strangely adrift. Not even tinkering with one of Mrs. Weasley's bamboo dragonflies can lift his spirits as it used to. There's something behind Ginny's evasive glances, and Harry has an inkling that it won't stay hidden for long. The Weasleys' garden was unlike anything Draco had ever seen, and even Harry found it breathtaking. Rather than the cramped, utilitarian lawns he'd grown up with at Malfoy Manor, where every blade of grass was clipped to a precise height, this place seemed to have a life of its own. Wild weeds tangled among bright flower beds, gnarled tree roots broke through the walls, and a broad, lily-dotted pond teemed with croaking frogs. Draco's eyes widened in delighted surprise, and he felt his cheeks warming. He'd been sure the Malfoys' gardens were impressive, but they'd always struck him as stiff and formal, more like the Dursleys' lawn than a real, living space. Here, everything pulsed with joyous disorder. Vines curled up trellises, daisies and foxgloves jostled for space, and a pair of fiery red poppies nodded cheerfully in the breeze. On the neatly mown patch in front of the house, Ron zoomed over on a bamboo copter, clutched in one hand, and let it hover just above Draco's head. Draco laughed, swatting at the little whirring propeller as if it were a wayward pixie. Harry, still digesting the garden's sheer exuberance, politely declined the second ride. From the kitchen door, Fred and George peered out, grinning. "Oi, you lot," Fred called. "Come help us with the annual Weasley gnome-tossing competition. It's tradition." George jingled the bag they'd brought. "Great practice for hunting season. You're both in. No excuses." Draco and Harry exchanged a quick glance, then followed the twins across the lawn. As they passed a particularly thick clump of grass, Ron dove forward like an owl swooping on prey. In a flash, he reappeared, triumphantly brandishing a wriggling gnome. "Gotcha!" Ron crowed, setting the creature down gently. The gnome blinked up at them, its stubby arms flailing, and the six of them gathered around, ready for the first round of what promised to be the Weasleys' most chaotic and most fun garden game. Harry strode up to Ron by the edge of the pond, frowning in confusion as Draco, who was lazily flicking a bamboo dragonfly at the frogs, paid them no mind. "What is that?" Harry asked, nodding toward the small, wrinkled creature cradled in Ron's hand. Ron let out a hollow sigh. "A gnome." Harry's eyebrows shot up. "A gnome? You know those turn up in Muggle gardens all the time." He peered more closely at the bizarre little being. Its skin was rough, its round face puckered like a misshapen potato. Ron rolled his eyes. "No, Harry, real gnomes are different. This is a goblin." He held it out for Harry to inspect. "Magical creatures. Muggles can't normally see them." Harry frowned. "So what's the difference between Muggle goblins and Wizarding World goblins?" "Well," Ron said, shifting the goblin in his hand, "Muggle goblins live off the comforts of human society. No natural enemies, plenty of food and shelter. They've gotten cleverer than their wizarding cousins. They've even picked up how to dress themselves properly." He tapped the creature's tiny waistcoat with a crooked finger. "See, he's practically wearing a suit." Before Harry could answer, a startled voice called from behind them. "Ron, is that your little brother?" Everyone froze. Ron blinked. "Weasley?" he whispered. For a moment, there was only stunned silence, until Draco glanced up from the frogs and exclaimed, "Hey! After all, I am a Ravenclaw," Ron declared. Fred and George exchanged startled looks. Ron Weasley, the youngest Weasley, the one they'd spent all summer teasing, was talking about goblins in the Muggle world of his own accord. "Well," Ron went on, "I asked Dad why goblins in the Muggle world look so different from the ones we have in the Wizarding world." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "All I really knew was what I'd seen for myself. Round, rosy-cheeked little fellows, more like tiny Santas with fishing rods, fluent speakers, smooth-skinned, but I never stopped to wonder why they're so unlike ours." Fred and George, who had been poised to launch into their usual barrage of jibes, found themselves utterly speechless. They knew better than anyone that Ron rarely took the initiative to question or learn anything beyond the Quidditch pitch. A sudden, piercing shriek snapped everyone out of their reverie. "Let me go! Let me go!" Heads whipped around to see a diminutive goblin, its twisted features contorted in fury, dangling upside down in Ron's grip. Its calloused little feet kicked wildly. Harry, Hermione, and even Draco, who had wandered over out of curiosity, realized the goblin must have been screaming for a while. Only now did they register the sound. Ron tightened his grip around its ankles and hoisted it higher. "All right," he announced, addressing Harry and Draco. "Pay attention. This is exactly what you do." With that, he began swinging the goblin overhead in a smooth, lasso-like arc. The creature's frantic screams echoed under the canopy of trees as Ron demonstrated the first lesson in goblin handling, Ravenclaw style. They ended up wasting the entire afternoon like that. Even Harry, though he'd been hesitant at first, joined in, and it wasn't because of the goblin's bite. Ron had assured them that the wound wouldn't do more than make them a little dizzy, which explained why they couldn't locate the goblin's tunnel. Harry believed him without question. Chapter 33, Farewell Letter. Happy times are always short, especially when everything finally seems to be going your way. Over the past few days, Ginny had watched Ron closely and at last convinced herself that the whole business in his room had been nothing more than a harmless misunderstanding. Only Fred and George still teased him about it on occasion, and even they soon ran out of good jokes. About a week after the arrival at the burrow, on a bright, clear morning, Harry found an owl swooping down the chimney with a letter in its beak. It was from Sirius. As Harry read Sirius's neat, looping handwriting, he realized something long neglected had just resurfaced. Kreacher, the house elf of 12 Grimmauld Place. Kreacher had kept himself hidden ever since Harry returned to the Black family home, too afraid of Harry's authority to show his face or utter a syllable. "Tell us, Kreacher," Ron said, peering under the stairwell. "Where have you been all this time, and how have you eaten or slept?" The house elf trembled, tightly wrapping his arms around himself, refusing to speak at all. After all, Ron was still the pure-blood traitor's son in Kreacher's eyes. Harry stepped forward, voice firm. "Kreacher, answer Master Weasley's question, and do not call him that." At the sound of Harry's tone, Kreacher straightened, compelled by magic older than wizards. With a quavering voice, he murmured, "My poor mistress, I have been hiding here, beside Master Harry Potter." Silence followed as the household absorbed Kreacher's words. The sun slanted through the windows of the burrow, illuminating a new chapter in their lives, one in which even the most overlooked spirits could no longer remain in the shadows. Kreacher's thin shoulders slumped as he muttered under his breath, "Master Potter has never formally summoned me, so I am not bound to obey his orders. I can fend for myself, thank you very much." Ron peered over the edge of his blanket, curiosity overcoming his grogginess. "But there are plenty of chickens in the yard, Kreacher," he said. "You could just help yourself." The house elf bristled. "Yes, free-range poultry at the burrow, but what if the mistress notices? What if I'm seen gobbling a spare leg or two before the family sits down for dinner? I've already brought shame upon myself by tasting their food on my very first night here. If I—" He broke off with a rattling sigh, the silver chains around his ankles clinking mournfully. Harry stood up and fixed Kreacher with a stern gaze. "All right, then," he said firmly. "I'm ordering you to eat at the Weasley table at midday from now on. No excuses, no exceptions. Do you understand?" The little elf bowed so low his nose nearly touched the floor. "Yes, young master, I understand." Kreacher spoke with a weighty exhale, as though the effort of obedience threatened to break him. Harry watched him go, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face that he quickly suppressed. Better Kreacher carried out his orders. No one needed a desperate elf skulking around, driven by shame or hunger. From beneath his tangerine quilt, Ron's half-lidded head popped up. "This afternoon, you say? You really mean it, Harry? He won't." But Harry had already left the room, leaving Ron to drift back to sleep under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. The matter was settled. Kreacher would join them at lunch, just as Harry had commanded. Harry lay on his narrow cot in the burrow's makeshift tent, staring at the canvas overhead. Without Kreacher's nocturnal rattling to lull him to sleep, his mind refused to quiet. "Are we leaving today?" Draco asked, poking his head through the tent flap in striped pajamas, eyes heavy with sleep. Harry sighed, rummaging through the pockets of his robe until he found a folded letter. Yes, Sirius sent this by Kreacher. He smoothed out the parchment and read, "Dear Harry, I'll be at the burrow this afternoon to pick you three up. Please speak to Arthur, Molly, and the rest of the family about our arrangements. Also, good news, Dobby has accepted a permanente NT position working for Professor Dumbledore. And there's someone new I can't wait for you to meet at my house. All my love." Sirius Draco's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Does that mean I'll finally see Malfoy Manor, where my mother grew up?" Ron sat bolt upright in his sleeping bag. Why didn't he send an owl? He ran a hand through his hair, looking affronted. Surely he knows Mum wouldn't let us just vanish without warning. Harry shrugged. A letter's better than an owl, no chance of interception, and it gives them something concrete to reply to. Draco leaned forward. But who's the new friend we're supposed to meet? Ron snorted. Probably Dobby. I still can't fathom why Dumbledore would pay a house elf. It's all sentiment with him. You've got it wrong, Harry said quietly. Read it again. Ron scowled and unfolded the letter a second time. He scanned the lines, brow furrowing. It says Dobby's already taken the job at Hogwarts, so the new friend can't be him. Harry folded the letter and tucked it into his robe. Exactly. We'll have to wait and see who Sirius has in store for us. Ron sank back down, looking both annoyed and intrigued. Draco slipped back into the tent, murmuring happily to himself about Malfoy Manor. Harry lay back, the morning light filtering through the canvas, anticipation fluttering in his chest. This afternoon held more than just a simple rescue. It held new surprises, and possibly a glimpse of home for them all. Sirius's letter had arrived late the night before, and Harry was still mulling over its news. Dobby had accepted the position that Professor Dumbledore had offered him at Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy gently rubbed his temple, still uneasy around Ron Weasley after all their past misunderstandings. He resented how he'd once thought Ron a schemer, actively deceiving Harry's trust. Now he felt foolish for ever doubting him. Ron, Harry began hesitantly, glancing at the red-haired boy. I think Dobby's recommendation might have come from Lupin. Lupin? Ron's eyebrows shot up. For a moment he looked as bewildered as Harry had felt. Then recognition dawned. Oh, Professor Remus Lupin, Dad's old friend at the Ministry. He flashed Harry an encouraging grin. He must have spoken to Dumbledore about Dobby. About half an hour later, the trio descended to the Burrow kitchen, where the rest of the Weasley family and Ginny were already gathered around the breakfast table. The scent of toast and marmalade filled the air. Harry slipped the letter into the folds of his robes and, startled, barely noticed when Mrs. Weasley pressed a plate of buttered bread into his hands. Harry, dear, you look as if you've seen a boggart, she chided gently, peering at him over her spectacles. Harry forced a smile. I'm fine, Mrs. Weasley, just a bit preoccupied. Mrs. Weasley exchanged a knowing look with Ginny, who stood shyly at her mother's side, cheeks pink. Mrs. Weasley reached out to tuck a stray curl behind Ginny's ear. Ginny, you haven't been badgering our guest again, have you? Harry realized in an instant how closely Mrs. Weasley had watched the two of them these past days, and how much unspoken pressure she must have felt on Ginny. It's not Ginny, he said quickly. It's just this letter. He placed a reassuring hand on Ginny's shoulder. She lifted her head, confusion giving way to relief. Ron wheeled around in his chair. Well, since Harry's so mysterious, how about some breakfast? I'd hate to see someone faint before knowing what Professor Lupin had to do with Dobby. Harry laughed and relaxed. Draco, an uninvited but tolerated guest for now, followed suit. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of family chatter dissolved the last of Harry's nerves. As toast was passed and stories began, the kitchen felt warm not just from the stove, but from the welcome that Harry hadn't realized he'd missed so much. The entire Weasley kitchen froze as Harry slipped the letter across the table. Mrs. Weasley's eyes went hard, and at once Ron and Draco both knew better than to ask what was happening or why Ginny was involved. Harry lowered his voice almost to a whisper. It's from Sirius. At the name, Mrs. Weasley's warm smile vanished. She reached out for Harry's slice of toast, but without thinking, stuffed half a dozen eggs on top, as though she were afraid he'd leave the house hungry. Sirius will be here at noon today, Harry added, watching her closely. Mrs. Weasley's hand trembled on the table. When did you? Harry ducked his head. There's no. Mrs. Weasley began, then caught sight of Fred and George slipping out the back door. She snapped, Fred, George, go fetch Percy and get him downstairs now. The twins darted away, nearly knocking over Harry's chair. A moment later, a sharp hiss came from outside, the unmistakable sound of a tire losing air. I'm so confused, Mrs. Weasley muttered to herself. I thought I knew everything that was going on. She turned to Mr. Weasley, who had just come through the door carrying the breakfast dishes. Arthur, she said quietly but firmly, you'll join us for lunch today, at noon. He blinked at her. Drink? She gave him a pointed look. Drink, today of all days. Mr. Weasley straightened as though bracing himself. Understood, Molly. I really understand. Harry slung his satchel over his shoulder. Mum, we're off. Be careful, she broke in, her voice softer now. And don't you worry, everything will be all right. As Harry and Draco slipped out of the room, the Weasley household paused on the brink of an afternoon that none of them would ever forget. Ron didn't usually move this fast, but even he knew the burrow was no place to linger. He scooped up a few leftover mince pies and bolted out the back door. Harry and Draco followed close behind, murmuring quick goodbyes, while Ginny slipped away into the house as quietly as she could, no doubt glad to dodge another of Mrs. Weasley's pointed questions. By the time they'd crossed the garden and ducked behind the old privet hedge, Ron was panting. I really don't like this, he admitted, leaning against the brambles for support. You know how Mrs. Weasley is. Sirius knows it too. He wouldn't even send the letter himself. He got me to deliver it. Harry folded his arms, frowning. What's that got to do with us? Are we any safer at Grimmauld Place than we would be at the Burrow? Draco swept a hand over his shoulder in a casual shrug. Honestly, I don't care. It's going to be entertaining. They exchanged a final glance under the moonlit sky and set off down the path, ready, or as ready as 3 teenage wizards and a reluctant ex-Marauder could possibly be. Chapter 34. Flu Network. Harry had half expected today's lunch to be more tense than usual. Sirius Black was due any moment to collect him, after all, but he hadn't realized quite how solemn it would be. The Weasleys had laid out a feast in the garden: roast chicken, steaming meat pies, crisp salads, slices of cake, pitchers of juice, roast potatoes, fried sausages, and a large tureen of onion soup, so fragrant it made Harry's mouth water. Yet no one dared touch a single bite. Ron sat rigidly in his chair, eyes fixed on his plate as if it were booby-trapped. Fred and George, usually the picture of mischief, sat side by side, expressionless and eerily reminiscent of Percy for the first time in their lives. Ginny glanced at Harry every few seconds, her face a mix of worry and curiosity, as though she were waiting to see how he'd react. Percy himself, who never let anyone forget his prefect status, had quietly removed his badge and placed it beside his plate. Even Draco Malfoy, pale to begin with, looked as though he were afraid to breathe. His usual sneer vanished. Not one of the garden gnomes dared make a sound. By a peony bush lay a little goblin, upside down, mouth agape in silent shock. Mrs. Weasley had seen fit to administer a sharp rap with her umbrella for any creature that dared to chatter. It was a stark reminder that decorum still mattered, even on the brink of extraordinary events. Mrs. Weasley paced by the back gate, her eyes darting every few seconds, as though she expected it to burst open at any moment. Everyone at the table held their breath, waiting for the familiar green flames of the Flu Network to leap out of the grate and welcome Sirius Black into the Weasley garden. Chapter 11. An early luncheon at the Burrow, Mr. Weasley checked his pocket watch yet again, his eyebrows knitting together in impatience. No one else seemed quite so on edge, except for Creature, who had curled up in the corner by the kitchen door, clutching a hard crust of bread. The house elf nibbled at it like bitter medicine, his lips drawn back in a perpetual scowl. Harry shifted in his seat, tugging at his jeans. He understood perfectly well why Mrs. Weasley wanted everyone to eat early. Midsummer at the Burrow could grow stifling by midday. But he still couldn't fathom why they'd all arrived at the house so promptly at 11 o'clock, only to sit and wait. Every few minutes he glanced up through the window at the wide gravel drive, hoping to see the familiar approach of a flying motorbike. Sirius Black's enchanted motorcycle was notorious, and Mr. Weasley had joked that Hagrid sometimes borrowed it for outings. Harry liked the idea, though he couldn't quite picture the giant bumpy-haired gamekeeper perched on a two-wheeled machine. At that moment, Creature's thin shoulders twitched, and he spun toward the back door, his sallow eyes widening. Harry followed his gaze just in time to see Sirius himself stride into the kitchen, hair wind-blown and cheeks flushed. "Mum, Dad," Sirius called with a grin, dropping into the empty chair to Mr. Weasley's left. "Is this dinner already? It's only 11:30. I left Grimmauld Place at 10:30. I must have hit every bit of traffic in Britain." Mr. Weasley laughed and patted the chair beside him. Mrs. Weasley bustled forward with a steaming tureen. "Onion soup." Sirius declared, spoon poised. He dipped into the rich broth with relish, savoring the first hot mouthful. Just what I needed after that ride. Harry watched as the tension in Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's shoulders melted away. Finally, their long wait had a delightful and flavorful ending. Molly pressed a glass into Sirius's hand with a bright smile. My specialty, she said. Without a second thought, Sirius tipped it back. It was as though Molly, standing to Arthur's right, didn't exist. Arthur made a strangled little noise and rubbed his thigh. Sirius, he said, clearing his throat, a colleague of mine in the international department sent this over, supposed to be a fine vintage. Sirius raised an eyebrow and sniffed the pale lie. Quid? Vodka? Arthur hesitated. Well, it's actually quite low in alcohol, practically like water. Sirius waved a dismissive hand. I'm planning to pop over later to collect Harry and the others. A little wine won't slow me down. Arthur looked at him anxiously. You flew here by flu, didn't you? You really shouldn't have a drop, or you might mispronounce your destination and end up somewhere strange. You know what they say in the Muggle world, don't drink and drive. Molly stepped forward. He's right, Sirius. Flu travel isn't foolproof if you're under the influence. Sirius chuckled, setting the glass on the mantel. 3 centuries of flu use, and you still worry? Thanks, Molly, but I'll pass this time. Molly and Arthur exchanged relieved smiles as Sirius strolled off, already planning his next move. Remember the Dillman tragedy of 1855? Sirius began, leaning back in his chair. Witch Violet Dillman had been choking and hiccuping after a furious quarrel with her husband Albert. In her flustered state, she stepped into the flue to visit her mother and simply vanished from the network. Poor Albert never saw her again. He never touched the flue network in the years that followed, right up to his death. Mr. Weasley gave an impressed nod, while Harry cast a worried glance at Mrs. Weasley. No matter where they ended up sleeping tonight, Arthur was going to be in for a rough time. Sirius, Mrs. Weasley interrupted, her voice cool but her knuckles white around her teacup. I'm afraid you've only half the story. She paused to collect herself. Violet Dillman didn't disappear forever. She simply misfired her journey and apparated into the hearth of a handsome young wizard in Bury St. Edmunds. His name was Myron Ozerhouse. He found her there, tear-streaked and ash-smudged, and fell in love at first sight. She allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. They went on to live happily together and raised 7 children, just as Arthur and I have. By the way, they turned out to be distant relatives of ours. Quite a remarkable coincidence. Mr. Weasley squeezed his wife's hand appreciatively, and even Sirius looked taken aback by the twist in the tale. Harry breathed a quiet sigh of relief. No matter how tense things were, at least the Dillman story had a happy ending after all. Ron paused mid-bite, so captivated by the tale that he'd entirely forgotten to eat. If Draco Malfoy hadn't swooped in for the last piece of chicken pie, Ron might still be chewing away. Mrs. Weasley cleared her throat and resumed. Poor Uncle Albert, she said. He had 1 too many fire whiskeys and staggered into the flue network, slurring his address. No one on the other end could understand him, and he never made it through. Oddly enough, Miss Violet didn't appear until long after he'd passed away. Sirius nodded gravely. Moral of the story, always enunciate clearly when you travel by flue, and above all, don't get drunk beforehand. He turned and flashed Harry a warning smile. You hear that, Harry? Be very careful. Molly Weasley then fixed Harry with a gentle, yet firm look. And remember, dear, there's more than one wizarding family lined up to adopt you. Someday you and your godfather might have to go your separate ways. She lingered on the word godfather, as if to make sure he understood. Harry said nothing. He lowered his fork to his plate and poked at his salad, fully aware that Molly had abandoned any notion of loosening Sirius's tongue with more fire whiskey. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, a bustling crowd had gathered around the Weasley kitchen fireplace, waiting their turn to travel by flue. Sirius pressed a hand to Harry's shoulder. Listen carefully. You need to call out your destination before you step into the fire, otherwise the heat and ashes will scramble your magic. From his pocket, he produced a small pouch of sparkling powder. With a deft pinch, he scattered it into the flames. Instantly, the fire flared bright green and towered over Fred, crackling like a living thing. Harry drew a steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and shouted, "Number 12, Grimmauld Place. Then, without hesitation, he plunged into the green fire. In the blink of an eye, both Harry and the flames vanished. Chapter 35. Lupin Harry felt utterly mortified. There he stood, clutched in a fierce maternal embrace from Mrs. Weasley, while Ginny, his secret crush, looked on with red-rimmed eyes. His pockets bulged with hot, freshly baked ham pasties, making his legs feel like they were strapped to boiling kettles. He was relieved that Ron and Draco had already vanished in a burst of emerald flame. They hadn't witnessed this display of affection. "Harry, be off now," Mrs. Weasley sniffed, hastily brushing tears from her cheeks. Harry paused to take in his Weasley family, Fred and George, Ginny and Percy, all of them with glistening eyes. He savored the sight. This household was as much home to him as Hogwarts ever was. With a deep breath, he turned toward the hearth. "Number 12, Grimmauld Place," he called into the green flames. Almost at once, his surroundings blurred. The Floo network's familiar rush engulfed him, so exhilarating that for a heartbeat he forgot the ache of leaving the burrow behind. It felt as though he'd been sucked into a colossal, winding pipe, his body twisting and propelled forward by an unseen force. A deafening whistle roared in his ears. He blinked against the vertigo as the emerald fire swirled around him like a tornado. Something hard struck his elbow. Instinctively, he crossed his arms to protect his chest, even as the floor dropped out from under him, and the world spun once more. Now it felt as though an icy hand had smacked his cheek. Harry squinted through the blurred lens of the portkey and saw a line of furnace doors flashing past, then caught a faint glimpse of a room beyond a fireplace. His stomach lurched with the memory of lunch, and he worried the chicken pie in his pocket might spill out. Desperate, he squeezed his eyes shut and willed the world to stop spinning, then collapsed face first onto something soft. He pushed himself up on one elbow and realized it wasn't a carpet at all, but a mountain of quilts, no doubt laid out by Sirius. Blinking, he took in his surroundings. It was a kitchen, yes, but nothing like the burrow's cozy clutter. This one was grand and immaculate, its polished stone floor echoing underfoot. A long wooden dining table dominated the center, big enough, Harry thought wryly, to sleep the entire Weasley family. "Harry, you all right?" Ron asked, worry etched on his face. "We missed you," Draco added, stepping forward with surprising warmth. "Good thing we had these blankets ready," Sirius said, brushing quilt folds aside. Harry turned at the sound of another voice. A slender man stood there he didn't recognize, young, with light brown hair shot through with silvery white. He wore an elegant coat, yet his cheeks were pale with cold. Offering a gentle smile, the stranger said, "Hello, Harry. I'm Remus John Lupin. You can call me Remus or Lupin." Harry managed a small, grateful smile in return. "Thanks for everything." Remus Lupin noticed the intensity of Harry's stare and offered him a gentle smile. "Is something the matter, Harry?" Harry hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Lupin greeted the question as casually as if they were discussing dinner plans. "Once a month I change," he said. "I'm a werewolf." The moment the word left his lips, Ron and Draco instinctively stumbled backward. They formed a loose semicircle around Harry, as if shielding him from some unseen danger. But Harry didn't flinch. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and gave Lupin a firm nod. "Hello, Professor," Harry said politely. He sounded nothing like the others. He had the same unshakable trust in Lupin that he had in his father and in Sirius. Sirius Black's face lit up. He swept forward and enfolded Harry in a hug, beaming with satisfaction. His eyes sparkled, not with the indulgence of a godfather, but with the warmth of an old friend reunited. Harry felt as though he had just returned home. Lupin's expression mirrored Sirius's, surprise softening into relief and joy. Ron and Draco, still uneasy, barely registered the moment. "It's oddly nostalgic," Lupin murmured, his gaze distant. Harry glanced from Sirius to Lupin and back again, sensing the history that bound these three men together. Lupin took a steadying breath. "You should know, when I was a boy, I was deliberately attacked by Fenrir Greyback. He turned me into what I am now." Harry's grip on Lupin's hand tightened in silent solidarity. In that instant, any fear or doubt vanished. Here, among friends of old, he finally understood the true measure of courage and the depth of the bond that held them all together. Professor Lupin fell into step beside them as they headed toward Hogsmeade. He gave a wry little smile. I owe my place at Hogwarts entirely to Dumbledore, he said over his shoulder. Speaking of which, have you ever heard of the Shrieking Shack? Harry and Draco shook their heads at once, but Ron's hand shot into the air. I know it. James and I snuck into Hogsmeade there in our first year, he said, grinning at Sirius, who rolled his eyes. Sirius huffed. Don't forget the trouble I stirred up, too. We all helped make that place famous. Lupin chuckled softly. Oh, you'll get a mention in the story, Padfoot, but the legend really began with me. Rumor has it the shack is haunted by wailing ghosts, yet every whisper of those screams was born from my own suffering. Dumbledore knew exactly what he was doing. He let the rumors spread to keep curious students away. But what about us? Sirius protested. We howled ourselves a bit, didn't we? One moment, please, Lupin answered gently, waving off his friend's protest. His eyes darkened as he tucked a sleeve into his coat pocket. Becoming a werewolf, that was agony. Each month, I had to isolate myself, locked away in that very building. In the throes of transformation, I wanted to bite out my own throat just to end the pain. I clawed at my arms and legs until the moon went down. The villagers heard the screams, the rending sounds, the growls, and they were certain a vicious poltergeist had taken root in that house. They bolted their doors and shivered in their beds for miles around. Even now, though the shack has lain silent for years, nobody dares approach it. They still imagine ghosts. He gave them a triumphant little grin. See? No ghosts, just a very unhappy werewolf. Ron sighed theatrically, disappointment shining in his eyes. I always wanted it to be haunted. Lupin's expression softened. For me, it was the darkest night of my life. They walked on in thoughtful silence, the shadow of the old building looming down the cobblestone lane behind them. It wasn't all bad, really, being a werewolf at Hogwarts, not with the school itself, and more importantly, the company of true friends. To keep your father and the other teachers from discovering my condition, I invented every excuse I could during my monthly disappearances. Sometimes I'd claim my mother was gravely ill, other times that an uncle had died, and I needed to attend a funeral. Of course, the rumors still circulated, but instead of abandoning me, my friends only drew closer. By their 5th year, they'd mastered the animagus transformation, so they could stay by my side, even on nights when I turned into a wolf. I remember how proud and happy I felt, knowing I wasn't utterly alone. So Peter's animagus form was a mouse? Ron blurted out, wide-eyed. I, Remus Lupin, felt a blush of embarrassment and confusion. How on earth had Ron guessed that? And why now, in light of everything? My heart tightened at the mention of Peter Pettigrew, the same traitor whose betrayal led to James's death. I fixed Ron with a serious look. Was this really Arthur and Molly Weasley's son, or had I somehow misjudged him too? Sirius rolled his eyes and shot me a wry grin. Honestly, how are they supposed to stick around when you turn into a wolf? My father wouldn't even look at me afterward. I took a breath, the old ache of loss and guilt stirring once more, but so did a flicker of hope, seeing that loyalty could still exist, even in the darkest of circumstances. Harry stared at Lupin, nuanly bewildered. But werewolves only threaten humans, don't they? Why all these precautions? Lupin gave a patient smile. True, they can't harm creatures in animal form, but we're headed to the Shrieking Shack through the hidden tunnel beneath that humping willow. Remember how you anchored it here? It won't grant us passage unless someone can still it. Harry winced. I didn't mean to summon it. Accidents happen, Lupin said kindly. Here's the plan. Peter will shrink himself to the size of a rat and slip under the willow's thrashing branches. Once inside, he'll find the secret knot that freezes the tree's limbs. With the willow pacified, the path to the shack opens. Harry nodded slowly. And Sirius and James? They'll become large animals, big enough to deter any werewolf that might attack, Lupin explained. Their very presence will keep us safe. Harry's eyes flicked between Lupin and Sirius. You mentioned nicknames, Prongs and Padfoot? Lupin chuckled. Exactly. Prongs is your father, and Padfoot is Sirius. Harry frowned, thinking hard. Prongs, Dad's a deer, obviously. But what kind? A stag, Lupin said, amused. Harry crossed his arms. Stag just means a male deer. Sirius laughed. Typical Ravenclaw move. James is a moose, the largest of the deer family. Harry's face brightened. A moose, of course. Satisfied, Lupin clapped him on the shoulder. Peter's ready beneath the willow. Let's go. With Peter poised to slip under the branches and Sirius and James preparing to assume their protective forms, the four friends moved toward the enchanted tree. Soon the secret passage would open, and they would face whatever awaited them in the shrieking shack. Chapter 36. The Mad Black Family. James Potter. What kind of man was his father? Since the end of last year's tumult, Harry found himself reassessing the hero who died fighting Voldemort. Gone was the distant legend he'd once admired. In his place stood a devoted parent who had given his life to protect his wife and child, and a proud pure-blood wizard who'd taken up arms against the Dark Lord. But James Potter's reputation at Hogwarts hadn't been uniformly glowing. He'd been top of his class, yes, but he'd also mercilessly tormented Severus Snape, never knowing Snape served Dumbledore in secret, snatching away Lily's affections and flaunting the triumph. That side of his father was hard to reconcile with the man Harry knew from bedtime stories. Still, recent revelations had painted James's younger self in a new light. Harry had watched him risk everything to help his friend Remus Lupin, despite the danger of his animagus training. He'd learned that James refused to judge or ostracize a werewolf, valuing loyalty over prejudice. That courage, that compassion, felt truer to Harry's heart than any schoolyard prank. Harry exhaled, relief washing over him. Perhaps James's pursuit of Lily had always been born of genuine love, not cruelty towards Snape. He simply hadn't understood, none of them had, that Severus was more than the target of a bully. He was Dumbledore's agent in the shadows. And now Harry saw his father anew. Flawed in youth, yes, but brave and unwavering in friendship. For the first time, he felt he was starting to truly know James Potter. "Harry, I hope you're not too put off by the decor," Sirius said with a wry smile as they reached the old stairwell. Harry blinked, roused from his thoughts, and took in the corridor around him. On their way to the bedroom wing upstairs, every detail spoke of dark magic at its darkest. A massive umbrella stand, fashioned from a shattered troll's leg, loomed at the foot of the stairs. Along the wall, a tarnished silver plaque held a row of shriveled heads, house elves, their twisted features frozen in eternal agony. Harry's heart sank as he recognized the source of Creature's madness. Sirius shrugged, exasperated. "Believe it or not, this was my best shot at tidying up. My ancestors were brilliant, evil geniuses who decked out the place with reinforcement spells and unbreakable curses. Nothing here can be undone, at least not without a whole lot of trouble." He paused on the bottom step, eyes on Harry. "That's why I've arranged for you to stay with the Weasleys for a while. Proper home comforts, you know? The fact that, well, let's just say Hogwarts has some unexpected surprises this year is only part of it. The other part is this house." Harry sighed and brushed a hand through his hair. "All right," he said reluctantly. "The burrow it is." Harry's stomach churned as he stared at the mounted head of a house elf on the wall. He couldn't help thinking of Dobby. Nausea rose in him. This grotesque trophy was the work of Sirius's dear Aunt Elidora, only halted once her family discovered what she'd done. Sirius caught the sudden pallor on Harry's face and nodded in understanding. "Blimey," Ron blurted, "your family's full of lunatics." "Ron," Harry hissed. Draco snorted. "You're not wrong, but not entirely right either. Almost every black we know is certifiable, except my brother and me. Even he's a bit weak." He waved a dismissive hand. "Think about it. Phineas Nigellus, our great-great-grandfather, still holds the record for Hogwarts' most hated headmaster. And Araminta Merryweather, my mother's cousin, tried to push a ministry decree legalizing the slaughter of muggles." Ron gaped. Harry crossed his arms, glaring at his friend. Draco continued coolly. "The only reason Aunt Elidora was ever stopped from mounting house elf heads is because, in aristocratic circles, elves aren't deemed important enough for such honors." Aunt Elidora argued, quite passionately, that these poor creatures worked themselves to the bone for our family. Didn't she claim they were part of House E. Black and therefore nobler than ordinary house elves? A hush fell over them. Even Ron, dumbfounded, had nothing left to say. Sirius exchanged a wry look with Harry. It seemed the dark past of the Black family was far darker and far more absurd than either of them had imagined. Sirius described it with an eerie calm. In the Black household, the old house elves who could no longer carry trays were brutally executed. Their heads were magically preserved, enchanted to meld with the estate itself, and mounted above the family's front entrance, those grinning, disembodied faces greeting everyone who passed in or out. Harry stared in disbelief. His godfather's voice was so flat he might have been reading from a ledger. He couldn't help wondering whether his own father had grown up hearing the same tales, and whether that was why the Order obsessed over Slytherin so relentlessly. He glanced at Professor Lupin, who sat unnervingly quiet, his face grave as though this horror was old news. Harry let his gaze drift to Draco Malfoy. Pale and tense, the boy looked as if he'd just discovered his whole world was built on monstrous cruelty. Draco leaned forward, eyes wide. "This is where my mother grew up," he muttered, voice nearly cracking. Harry's heart turned over. If the Blacks treated even their most faithful servants with such brutality, how could any elf have the chance to think, or to dream of freedom? And here he was, sheltered at Hogwarts, barely able to imagine the real evil that lingered beyond its walls. Draco Malfoy, who'd always been wrapped in the comforts of his family's elite status, could hardly believe how completely the Black household had upended pure-blood aristocracy's usual trappings. Aside from a few snake-shaped doorknobs and chandelier accents, every other detail in this manor felt startlingly unlike the austere halls he called home. Ron, listening intently to every word, finally spoke up. "Wait, did you say your aunt actually cares for her house elves?" Draco gave a wry smile. "Believe it or not, yes. Wouldn't it be nice if the Malfoys had a fraction of that generosity? The Blacks treat every member of their household with genuine affection, house elves included. They formally disown any relative who isn't pure blood, but that's where it ends. No further cruelty. In their minds, even that banishment is an act of love." They moved on into the next room, where the far wall was entirely covered by an enormous tapestry. Its once vibrant colors had long since faded to near nothing, yet Harry could have sworn he saw the threads shimmer faintly, as if the fabric itself were stirring back to life. Several jagged holes marred the ancient tapestry, but even now its edges were knitting themselves back together. The gold thread still glittered, tracing a sprawling family tree that reached back to the Middle Ages. Across the top, embroidered in proud Gothic letters, were the words "Noble and Most Ancient House of Black," and just below, the family motto, "Forever Pure." "See?" Sirius tapped at a small round burn mark amid the northern branches. "I'm not on here, and neither is my Uncle Alfred. He left me a fortune in gold when I escaped from the Blacks." Draco, who'd been watching the thread weave itself closed, raised an eyebrow. "But it'll heal, right?" Sirius grinned. "You noticed too? Ever since I legally inherited the Black estate, the whole house seems to be waking up. Some of the old furniture that our family prized is repairing itself just as this tapestry is." He gestured toward another tier, this one ragged and jagged. "These holes, bitten by that vixen, are sealing up faster than I can blink." Heaving a quiet sigh, Sirius let his hand drop. He didn't mind the house's magic. On the contrary, he found it oddly comforting. In a strange way, he and his mad ancestors shared something, a stubborn resilience. Even here in his own room, he'd lined the walls and furniture with permanent adhesion spells and self-healing charms. Nothing, it seemed, could be torn out of the Blacks' history, or out of the Heir's stubborn hearts. The walls were plastered with glossy photographs of Muggle motorcycles, and here and there hung pin-up posters of bikini-clad Muggle girls.